like us to talk about?
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hey, good afternoon, wonderful people. It's just gone 3 p.m. and you're with Patrick Christys on GB News. Coming up, paramedics, 999 call handlers, ambulance technicians, hospital porters and cleaners could conduct a coordinated strike to bring the NHS to its knees this Christmas. The NHS is performing fewer operations than before the pandemic, despite receiving more money than ever. Earlier, the Health Secretary Steve Barclay said his door remains open after meeting with unions representing NHS staff. This is designed to cause maximum damage and it will impact the most vulnerable in society. I want to ask you at home how long someone you know has waited for an ambulance, for example, and are you concerned now about getting sick this winter? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Also, audio footage has been released of French and British Border Force boats operating what appears to be a taxi service across the Channel for illegal immigrants. It comes as trainee nurses are a hot topic at the minute, have reportedly been booted out of hotel accommodation to make way for asylum seekers in Yorkshire. We'll have the latest on that. We're going to play you that as well, see what you make of it. And buckle up, people, for monumental council tax increases. The average council tax bill could now top £2,000. What's yours? I want to know. Kent and Hampshire county councils said they were facing budget deficits of a scale that has never been seen before and need to increase tax. Councils are saying they might go bust, basically. But are you happy with the service that you're getting? Did you know you're supposed to have a local referendum if they rise it above 3%? That could be scrapped. And the news comes as the AA warns that thousands of drivers have been left to fork out after menacing potholes damage more than 250 cars a day. Do you feel as though you're getting value for money from your local authority? Bizarrely, I want to see your pothole horror stories. Send your pictures in, gbviews at gbnews.uk. It's not all doom and gloom, OK? We do want to have a little bit of levity. I want to crown the UK's largest pothole later on in the show. gbviews at gbnews.uk. Moving away from that now, the King has personally asked Parliament to add his siblings, Princess Anne and Prince Edward, to the list of people who can deputise for him on official duties, withdrawing Prince Andrew and Prince Harry from the list. That'll give Harry something to really cry about, won't it? But first, it's your latest headlines.
A very good afternoon to you. 3 minutes past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister has told GB News dealing with illegal migration is his #1 challenge. Rishi Sunak also said his government wishes to reduce legal net migration, but refused to say by how much. The UK signed a deal worth up to £63 million with France last week in an effort to boost cross-channel cooperation. GB News has learned that more than 2,000 people crossed the English Channel in small boats over the past 3 days, whilst over 42,000 people have made the journey this year. Mr Sunak says tackling migrant crossings is a priority.
Government's policy and my policy is that we will want to reduce net migration over time, but I don't want to. Well, I'm not going to put an arbitrary number on it because I want to be honest with people. And I think right now our #1 challenge is getting a grip of the number of illegal migrants coming, and that's the thing I want to focus on first. I think that's what, by the way, the British public rightly want us to focus on. Our deal with the French this week is the first in a series of things that we'll need to do, but people should rest assured that this is a huge priority for me.
The Prime Minister has called on Russia to get out of Ukraine and end this barbaric war, blaming the conflict for worsening global economic shortages. Rishi Sunak, who's condemned the Russian president for not attending the G20 summit in Bali, says the weaponisation of energy and food is totally unacceptable. Addressing world leaders, including China's Xi Jinping, Mr Sunak also said the UK would stand ready to support Taiwan in standing up to Chinese aggression. He describes China as a threat to UK economic security.
Now, China represents a systemic challenge to our values and interests. It also represents the biggest state-based threat to our economic security. That's why it's right that we take the steps that are necessary to protect ourselves against that. Our approach is aligned with our closest allies, like America, like Canada, like Australia. I'm here at this summit talking to those leaders about our approach to China, and I'm confident that the way we are dealing with it is very much in accordance with how they are too.
The rate of inactivity in the workplace increased from July to September as those off to long-term sickness hit a record high. The ONS says it went up from 21.4% to 21.6%. Its figures also show UK unemployment rose by 0.1 in the same time period to 3.6%. They're citing economic pressures as a factor in employers holding back on recruitment. Economist Jack Kennedy says poor economic activity in the market was to blame.
Things that we've really seen in the labour market is this elevated rate of inactivity. We've seen a lot of workers dropping out of active participation in the labour market, and that's continuing to fuel a lot of these hiring challenges. We see in the latest ONS data today that inactivity rate continues to be elevated. Certainly long-term sickness rates and the withdrawal of older workers from the labour market continues to be quite a distinguishing feature.
The Health Secretary has said his door remains open after meeting unions representing NHS staff today. In a tweet, Steve Barclay said they'd discussed ways to make the NHS a better place to work and that talks will continue. Several unions are balloting their members for industrial action over pay and staff shortages. More than 4 million children are from families that receive universal credit. Latest data from the Department of Work and Pensions shows the number of children in households on credit has risen by 250,000 in the 6 months to August. It says almost 3/4 of those families are single-parent households. That research comes as a group of major supermarkets have called on the Education Secretary to expand the free school meal scheme to all children in England whose families receive universal credit. The retailers are warning of rising food costs in the coming months and a call on Westminster to do more to protect children and help struggling parents. A coroner has ruled the death of a toddler exposed to mould over a long period of time should be a defining moment for the housing sector. 2-year-old Awa Bishak, who lived in a one-bed housing authority flat in Greater Manchester, died from a respiratory condition caused by mould in December 2020. Rochdale's Coroner's Court heard Mr Abdullah had complained to local council about the mould, but was told to paint over it. It said the death should raise awareness around the issue. The United Nations says the world population has surged past 8 billion people today. It said China and India account for more than a third of the number of people on the globe, with India set to overtake China as the most populous country next year. UN projections say although the 8 billion milestone is a sign of human success, it also means there'll be fewer resources to go round. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, this afternoon, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said the pay deal sought by the Nurses Union was unaffordable, but acknowledged that people were struggling with the rising cost of living. This all ties in, doesn't it, to the NHS strike that we were talking about. And strap yourselves in, because it looks like it's about to get a lot worse. Earlier, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, met with unions representing NHS staff, and he said his door remains open. But, get this, it's not just nurses now, apparently, threatening action. Paramedics and hospital staff, porters, cleaners, ambulance technicians are reportedly planning to coordinate the strikes this winter, and it's raised concerns over the already strained health service. I mean, frankly, that would bring it to its knees, wouldn't it? The NHS is conducting fewer operations, though, than pre-pandemic levels, whilst receiving more funding, which is why a lot of people are scratching their heads about this. The health service's day-to-day budget is remarkably up 12%. Compared with before the pandemic, but the number of operations conducted is down 5.3%. That's according to the IFS. Now, the Royal College of Nursing have demanded a 17.6% pay rise, while other unions are asking for salary hikes that exceed inflation, so be around 10 to 12%. Now, I can't help but feel that it's going to be the most vulnerable who will suffer as a result. If someone like me gets a cold, or even, dare I say it, COVID, if that's still around anymore, I'm probably not going to end up in hospital. Someone my age won't. I've got no underlying health conditions, etc., etc. But at this time of year, especially as we hurtle headlong towards Christmas and January, it's the elderly, it's people with those existing health conditions who desperately need the NHS, people at risk of even just non-respiratory related issues, such as heart attacks, strokes, etc. They're going to be struggling. And I can't help but feel like it's those people who will suffer the most if the NHS essentially stops working. I want you to get your NHS experiences into me, good or bad, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But ask me the big question as well, answer me the big question, which is, are you very, very, very afraid of getting sick this winter? more so than maybe you were in the past. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let's speak now to former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell about this. Thank you very much, Stephen. Now, people might be scratching their heads a little bit because initially it was the nurses and we were told, well, look, it'll be done almost in a benevolent way. There'll be people there to cover for them. It'll be a short, sharp hit. But now we're looking at 6 unions in total, which includes paramedics, ambulance technicians, 999 call handlers, porters and cleaners. And this really is looking like a coordinated strike, which could, frankly, cripple the NHS. And that's not on, really, is it?
Well, I certainly agree with you that it's not consistent with the values of the people who work in the health service, from the senior doctors right through the staff of the health service to the porters and the administrative staff and everywhere. It's not consistent with their values to withdraw support from people of the kind you were describing in your introduction, people with strokes or heart attacks or emergency health needs. So whatever that happens in this dispute, and I very much hope that people will continue, as Steve Barclay said, to walk through his door and resolve it without a strike. Whatever happens, it clearly is necessary to ensure that urgent and emergency need continues to be met.
Yes, but this is a problem because a lot of people were thinking when it came to the nurses' strike, well, all right, some people will miss out on chemo, some people will miss out on dialysis, and that was bad enough. But we were told, well, the emergency side of things won't be affected. But now it definitely will be if indeed they do go on strike. Because if someone needs to call an ambulance, there might not be someone there to answer their call. There might not be anyone there to drive the ambulance. We're already hearing the ambulance waiting times are through the roof as it is. And from a purely moral perspective, I don't see how these people can do that and expect to get away with it without massive medical negligence claims.
Well, we don't yet know what we don't yet have a dispute with people beyond the nursing staff. And what we do have is unhappiness at the terms and conditions that are being offered by the health service. And we're seeing that not just in the preparations for an industrial dispute, also, of course, in the fact that the health service is currently unable to recruit the people it needs to be able to deliver the quality of care we all want to see. So whether you look at it from the point of view of trade union representatives or from the straight availability of staff to meet need, the health service does need to address the question of the terms and conditions of the people who work in it.
I get that, absolutely. But is it also, frankly, doing a number on itself? I mean, the PR operation, the anti-PR operation with our NHS at the moment is mega. Basically, everyone who's working in it who's part of a union is saying to everybody else, don't work in this, it's terrible. You won't have a life, you will be underpaid and overworked, etc. Please don't work here. And then they seem to be mesmerised and the fact that they haven't got enough people to fill vacancies, etc. Can I just say I've been doing, shockingly, I did a bit of research before I came on air. The average salary for a paramedic in the London area...
Don't make a habit of it, Patrick.
No, trust me, I won't. No, the average salary for a paramedic in the London area is $36,200. The average salary for an emergency ambulance technician, apparently, again, these is official stats, $30,100. People will be saying, well, the NHS now has got more funding than it ever has before, yet they seem to be unable to conduct as many basic treatments, operations, for example, down 5.3% since pre-pandemic levels. And those numbers don't really add up.
Well, I think there's two sets of numbers there. First of all, there's the numbers around the employment, the pay levels of people in particular positions in the health service. And clearly the health service, people who work in the health service, like everybody else in our society, are facing huge pressures on their domestic bills, whether it's their energy bills or their food bills and so forth. And like everyone else, they've got to make their household budgets balance. And that's the challenge the health service has to face if it's going to recruit the people that it needs. That's one set of issues. Then the other set you quite rightly raise is around the activity levels in particular. When you talk about procedures, operations, you're talking primarily about people off waiting lists. And we're seeing here that waiting lists are at the highest ever level, and that's part of the demand pattern being placed on the health service. But it's when you look at the health service, you have to look at the people waiting for on waiting lists. You also have to look clearly, as you have been, at the demand in the A&E departments and the ambulance services, and in primary care GP services, and in social care. The thing we often forget in these conversations is that when social care isn't able to do its job for a variety of reasons, the demand ends up in the health service.
Well, it does.
So all of these need to be considered as a whole, not as single pots, separate silos.
It does. And, of course, the knock-on effect of what might be non-emergency, quotes, non-essential treatment now, if that's not treated, then that can become very serious and it becomes a bigger problem down the line. Just some of those numbers again quickly. The NHS has apparently treated 5.3% fewer people than during, this is in 2022 so far, than during the same period in 2019. Meanwhile, supposedly anyway, the health services day-to-day budget is up 12% compared with before the pandemic. Can I just ask a question? Are we missing an elephant in the room here, which is population growth? They are now being asked to treat many more people. Are we missing this, do you think? Is this not discussed enough that there actually is so much more demand now? Part of that is driven through things like mass immigration.
Well, I don't think the biggest element on increased demand is migration, actually. I think the biggest element, it's been true for a long time, that the health service has faced rising demand, most importantly, because we're all living longer. The good news is we live longer. The bad news is that as we live longer, we need more health service and social care services. So we're seeing a rise in the budget to meet the demands right across health and social care. And as you quite rightly say, when we don't meet demands for people who actually could lead normal, reasonably healthy lives with a bit of support from social care, when we don't meet those needs, they become unnecessarily, avoidably ill, and they end up in the health service.
Yeah, and if you are just joining us, thank you very much, by the way. That was former Health Secretary Stephen Dowell. If you are just joining us, that was the topic which we're going to be returning to throughout the day. We went big on the nurses' strike last week, but now it's not just set to be nurses. It's set to be potentially paramedics, ambulance technicians, 999 call handlers, hospital porters and cleaners, which, let's be honest, is the NHS, certainly at ground level anyway. And that's supposedly, if indeed it comes off, going to be coordinated to coincide with the nurses' strike this winter, which, let's be honest, would absolutely cripple the NHS. And it kind of bangos the argument, doesn't it, that if nurses strike, then still there'll be non-essential and emergency care. Emergency care will be OK, because it clearly won't be if you can't call an ambulance, will it? But there we go. Moving away from that now, the Chancellor has indicated today in the Commons that local authorities will be allowed to increase council tax. That could be by as much as 5%, and without a referendum under the new plans. Now, I must say, people might be saying, oh, you sound a bit stupid here, not for the first time, but I didn't realise that in your local area, apparently you were supposed to have a local referendum if your council tax was risen by 3%, which I think is fantastic stuff. Anyway, there was no point me learning that fact yesterday, because that's going to be scrapped now, and they can just raise it, essentially, as much as they like, by as much as 5%, which is rather a lot. It's a tax hike being drawn up to fund social care amid soaring inflation and demands for increased wages for public sector workers. So, authorities are also under pressure to make ends meet. Some councils, like Hampshire and Kent County Council, they stop short of saying they're going to go bust without this, but they call for urgent financial help. They've got their backs to the wall. And I'm joined now by a Labour parliamentary candidate in one of those areas. It's Mike Tabb, who's the candidate for Dover and Deal. Thank you very much, Mike. Great to have you on the show. Residents, well, look, let's be honest, across the country, across the UK, are going to be shouting at their TV screens now, going, everything's going up, council tax as well. There's a pothole at the end of my road that hasn't been filled in, my bins haven't been taken out for months. Does council tax really need to go up by this much?
You're right, Patrick, and this is a crisis made in Downing Street. The Conservatives have completely tanked the economy. The public are feeling that already with their mortgage rates going up and the cost of living completely out of control. And now we're seeing the impact of that more locally in Kent and in Dover. And we're going to see that on local services. In Dover and Deal, where I will be the future MP in the surrounding villages, we're already seeing buses being cut. I've had stories of kids left stranded in the dark at bus stops because they can't get home from school. And now we're going to see further cuts, likely further cuts. We'll have to see what happens on Thursday.
Yeah, can I just ask Mike just on that? I mean, there are of course things that have been what would you say? I suppose unexpected expenditure. So stuff like dealing with these migrant hotels. Now I know the Home Office is paying for that, but I have a lot of local councils on to say they've got knock-on effects on that. There's also been, I mean, the massive elephant in the room is the pandemic, wasn't there? Which I imagine rinsed a lot of council budgets dry as well. Is there a question about councils not necessarily always spending that money that well?
You're right that there has been some extra expenses over the last few years, but Labour would have never got us into the position we're in now. We'd raise funds through windfall taxes, getting rid of the non-dom status and ensuring we've got a secure economy, and that's really important. And when it comes to the cost of migrants, it does cost a lot to house them in temporary accommodation, and Labour would speed that process up so that they're not stuck in temporary accommodation, which costs millions of pounds, so that those that need deporting are deported and those that need the help and support get it and they're put into more permanent housing. It's a broken system.
Look, I get that right now the Labour Party is trying to position itself potentially with some merit or as the party of financial responsibility. However, is it not a little bit disingenuous for you to say that, you know, we were in this mess singly because of the Tories? Because if everyone had voted Labour at the last general election, they'd have got Jeremy Corbyn, and we would be skinned now completely, even more than we are.
Well, now we've got Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, who's an economist, and she's worked at the Bank of England. And if we want security going forward, then Labour is the only government that will keep our economy secure and will raise money from those with broader shoulders, whereas the Conservatives, as we're likely to see on Thursday, are going to keep attacking hard-working people, raising council taxes and not completely failing to get a grip of the economy.
Yes, OK, I suppose my point was that, let's be honest, if we'd have voted for Jeremy Corbyn last time, then Labour would no longer be able to argue that this was all the Tories' fault, and we arguably would be local councils in a worse financial situation right now. But when it comes to people seeing things like Band D and Band H, look, to be honest with you, some of these are literally just letters to me, right? But, you know, Band D going up, Band H going up. I've had people on Twitter this morning saying to me, I'm just going to refuse to pay. Do you think there will be people who are just going to refuse to pay their council tax en masse?
There's going to be people who won't be afford to pay their council tax, and that's similar with mortgages. That's having a knock-on effect to rent. Energy prices are sky high. People can't afford to put petrol in their vehicles. The food prices are out of control. It's an absolute crisis made in Downing Street. From the OECD stats, we're the bottom country now. We're completely failing, and this is absolutely a Conservative creation, really.
OK, all right. Well, I will move on from you, Mike. Thank you very, very much. Mike Tapp there, who is the candidate for Dover and Deal, which is in Kent. What do you make of that? Do you think that this is a Tory problem? Some people might argue that we could have gone for growth a little bit sooner. Do you think they were cut off at the knees when it came to things like the coronavirus pandemic? And let's be honest, a lot of councils right now are struggling to deal with the migrant crisis, certainly hotels in their area, etc. GB Views at gbnews.uk. The main thing that I want to get from this, really, is you. I suppose regardless of maybe who's at fault, etc., how is this going to impact you? Do you feel as though you are getting value for money from your local council, your local authority? Are you able to pay what could be a proposed massive, really, council tax hike? The average council tax bill, supposedly, about to rise above £2,000 for the first time. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, Rishi Sunak has told GB News, exclusively, that tackling illegal migration is his top priority. It comes as around 2,000 people crossed the Channel in small boats in the past 3 days. We're going to hear what the Prime Minister has to say. We're also going to hear a very interesting audio recording of a conversation between French Border Force and British Border Force. I'm at pains to stress this is nothing new, but it does give you an impression of the kind of taxi service that we're currently offering to illegal immigrants. GB Views at gbnews.uk. We're back in a minute.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Now, just in the last few moments, I've had a little bit of breaking news through, and GB News has been told by the National Crime Agency there are now, get your heads around this one, more illegal Albanians in the UK than legal. This has just come through to us here, and Mark White, our Home Security Editor, has legged it into the studio to tell me about it. He's here right now. Mark, what is the latest?
Yeah, this is a briefing that I've just been to with the National Crime Agency. Very helpful. Occasionally you get the information that they know on certain topics. We were very keen to find out about the situation with regard to Albanian criminality in the UK. Now, the National Crime Agency say that it is now their belief that there are more illegal than legal migrants from Albania in the UK, which, of course, is very significant for any population base to realise that there are more people from that particular country that are here illegally than actually legitimately here. And of course, we saw just at the weekend there those protests that took place across central London, where some of the estimated 50,000 Albanians that live here legitimately were out protesting, saying that they are being demonised by the UK government and by the media as well, that their fellow countrymen and women are being demonised because of what's been said about the criminal elements within Albanian society that are coming across on the small boats.
Yeah, so just to drill down on this then, so just to make sure I've got this right, it's just coming through to us right now, and thank you for legging it in, Mark. Of all the Albanians in the UK, more of them are here illegally than legally. Is that it?
That is it. There are roughly 50,000 Albanians who are here legitimately, who've come across on visas to work or what other means to come across. But actually, those who've come into the country illegally, and that will include very many who've come across on small boats or in the backs of lorries, That now outnumbers, according to the National Crime Agency, the number of Albanians who are in this country legitimately and contributing to this society. Also, National Crime Agency confirming that the Albanian criminal gangs who are orchestrating so many of these Albanian nationals, their fellow countrymen and women, to come across to the UK, are doing it so that they can work in the criminal trade here. A lot of those that are coming across to work in the grey economy. So to work illegally, but to work in industries like construction or whatever, not contribute, obviously, to the tax system and to send that money back home to their dependents in Albania. But a significant proportion of them are coming across because they want to be involved in criminal enterprise. And the reason is simple. If they're coming across and working in the grey economy, for construction or whatever, they can make between £50 and £100 a day. If they're working in a cannabis farm, as what we call a farmer, over a 10-week period, they will make £10,000, which they can obviously then send home to the dependents. What we're also told by the National Crime Agency is that they are seeing a blatant manipulation of our modern slavery referral system. So this is a system that works if you believe, if you've been trafficked by criminal gangs forced to work for them in prostitution or maybe in a cannabis farm, you say, I'm a victim of modern slavery, and of course you're then treated as a victim rather than as a criminal suspect. But what the National Crime Agency say is that they're being told by police forces right across the country that the very first thing these Albanians who are running or farming these cannabis farms across the country are doing is immediately saying, I'm a victim of modern slavery. And they say that's just not legitimate. In many cases, they are blatantly manipulating these modern slavery referral mechanisms that we have.
So just to recap, it's quite strong stuff, this really. If you're just joining us, GB News has been told by the National Crime Agency that there are now, of the Albanian population in the UK, there are now more here illegally than legally. And as Mark White was saying there, working in the grey economy or then, I suppose, the drugs trade, essentially, and organised crime.
Working for criminal gangs.
Working for criminal gangs. And then on top of that, quite clued up on the law, which says, well, hang on a minute, I'm a victim of modern slavery as well. Slightly dispelling the myth, and it is a myth now, isn't it, that a lot of these people are indeed actual modern slaves. And when we saw those kind of protests that we saw at the weekend there in London, demanding their human rights, etc., I mean, it does look as though they're kind of after a bit of a free ride, really.
Well, there's no doubt that many Albanians who are here legitimately are very upset at the way that their country is being portrayed and their fellow countrymen and women. And, of course, they're proud of their nation and they want to stand up for their nation. They don't want to be demonised. But the truth is, perhaps their anger would be better placed directed towards those fellow, mainly countrymen, but some women as well, who are coming across, who are abusing the legal systems in this country to get across the channel to work here illegally.
Well, and it comes against the backdrop of yesterday. This time yesterday, you and I were talking about this £63 million deal with the French to help patrol the channel a bit better, 40% increase in patrols, etc., which was hopefully going to reduce this number. I mean, it couldn't be more apt given the figures that you've just given us. If it's all right with you, Mark, can you stay where we are? We're going to go to the headlines, and when we come back, we've got a bit of audio footage for you from some French border patrols and some British border patrols just communicating with each other when it comes to what's been going on in the channel. Now, it's important to stress this is a normal communication. It's nothing out of the ordinary, but it does, I think, serve to indicate the type of communication that goes on between the two forces and exactly how people arrive in the UK. Could not be more on the nose, really, given that now the National Crime Agency has revealed to GB News that there are, of the Albanian population in the UK, more people here illegally than illegally. It's almost like some people knew this all along, isn't it? GBViews at gbnews.uk. You are with me, Patrick Christys. We've got loads more coming up, but this is the big one, so I'm going to stick with it. Over to your headlines now, though, with, of course, the wonderful Rosie Wright.
.35, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. The Prime Minister's told GB News that dealing with illegal migration is his #1 challenge. Rishi Sunak also said his government wishes to reduce legal net migration, but refused to say by how much. GB News has learned that more than 2,000 people crossed the English Channel in small boats over the last 3 days. Mr Sunak says tackling migrant crossings is a priority.
Government's policy and my policy is that we will want to reduce net migration over time, but I don't want to. Well, I'm not going to put an arbitrary number on it because I want to be honest with people. And I think right now our #1 challenge is getting a grip of the number of illegal migrants coming, and that's the thing I want to focus on first. I think that's what, by the way, the British public rightly want us to focus on. Our deal with the French this week is the first in a series of things that we'll need to do, but people should rest assured that this is a huge priority for me.
The Prime Minister has called on Russia to get out of Ukraine and end this barbaric war, blaming the conflict for worsening the global economy. Rishi Sunak, who's condemned the Russian president for not attending the G20 summit in Bali, says the weaponisation of energy and food is totally unacceptable. Russian missile strikes have been reported across several cities in Ukraine, hours after the country's president addressed world leaders virtually at the G20 summit. According to Kyiv's mayor, at least 2 residential buildings have been hit. Several missiles were also shot down by air defence systems. Attacks are also being reported in Lviv and Kharkiv. You're up to date. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Patrick will be back in a moment. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1460 and €1.1464. The price of gold is £1,487.64 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,359 points.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News. Now, when the breaking news happens, it seems to happen right here on this very show, and today is absolutely no different. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, is still with me in the studio. He hot-footed it in, practically kicked the door down just a few moments ago before we went to the headlines to reveal that the National Crime Agency has told us now at GB News that there are, of the entire Albanian population in the UK, more people here illegally than legally, and that a lot of those people are working in either the grey economy, which is things like manual labour, construction, etc., or just out-and-out organised crime like drug cultivation and dealing, using, it would appear, the old modern slavery tactic as an excuse to not be deported. And this comes amid a backdrop, doesn't it, of what we were talking about yesterday, a 63 million quid deal to France to try to patrol the beaches and hopefully cut down the number of small boat crossings. But Mark is still here with me now. Mark, for people just joining us, just talk us through those figures again from the National Crime Agency before we're going to play the audience a clip that we've received, anyway, of a conversation between British Border Force and French Border Force about what's been going on in the Channel. Take it away.
Yeah, well, the National Crime Agency briefing us on what the situation is with regard to Albanians in this country, in particular those involved in criminality. And the most startling revelation from that briefing was the revelation that this particular country, of all those who are here legitimately, and we estimate it's around about 50,000 people that are here working legitimately in the UK and contributing to the economy, there are actually more Albanians who are here illegally in the UK. And I'm not sure there's another nation in the world you could probably say that was the case about. Also saying that, you know, those Albanians who are coming across to work in the grey economy, others are working for criminal gangs and working as what they call cannabis farmers, looking after cannabis farms in towns and cities across the country. And one of the first things they do, according to police forces feeding back to the National Crime Agency, is they say that they're victims of human trafficking.
Yes, and we know that around 12,000 of them have come by small boat, and it couldn't be more appropriate, really, because there's a clip doing the rounds at the moment of, it's an audio recording of a conversation between French Border Force and, French Navy, actually, and UK Border Force. And it provides a really fascinating insight into how it works when it comes to patrolling or guiding through, some would say, small boats in the Channel. Just take a listen to this.
ISSC SMT-03, we are on your route, coming with one ship or a small boat of migrants. Are you ready to receive them or not?
Yeah, good morning, sir. Yes, we see you there. We have just been tasked to another event, but there is another vessel on its way with an ETA of about 20 minutes. So if you could please stay with them and tell the other vessel, which is Border Force Ranger, will be there.
Okay, sir, we're received. We are staying with them and we are waiting for Border Force Ranger. Thank you for cooperation.
That's all copy, sir. Many thanks.
Force Ranger, go ahead, sir. Good morning, sir. This is French Maritime Police. We are right now on your starboard side. We contact Border Force Hurricane just before. Normally it's you who are coming on our position to take in charge the small boat that we are escorting.
French warship, this is Border Force Ranger. Yeah, we're just closing in your position at the moment. We'll be on scene in approximately 5 minutes.
Yes, OK, so that was a conversation between the French Navy and British Border Force regarding a boat, or potentially a number of boats anyway, in the Channel. Now, that is protocol, as Mark White is going to explain to us, but I think it does highlight why maybe some people are arguing that this is a bit of a taxi service. Mark, that is normal communications, isn't it, between those two?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that this whole issue of maritime vessels from France and, of course, the UK effectively picking up these people in small boats and taking them to the UK. There's no doubt that infuriates many people, understandably. But what happens, and it's worth explaining this to the audience with regard to the French, is that the second these migrants under French law are in the water, then they are not interfered with by the police because it becomes maritime law. They're in a boat, then they head out. Now, the French tried early on in this particular crisis to intercept vessels to take those migrants on board their vessels and return them to France. They realised pretty soon into that endeavour that those on the small boats were not cooperating. They were threatening to jump in the water, have their vessel rammed or overturned or whatever. So the French had decided from that point on that they won't force the vessels back to shore for fear of causing a tragedy. Instead, they shadow those small boats until they reach UK waters. And of course, they know once the boats get to UK waters that those on board want to be picked up by the British. So they're quite willing then. There's no struggle. They just very happily come on board those vessels. So that's what you're seeing. It's fascinating to hear it, of course. It's a level of cooperation, as I say, that will infuriate many in our audience who are listening and watching that. But, you know, that is what's happening day in, day out in the
It is what it is, unfortunately. There we go. Mark White, thank you very much. Mark White there, our Home and Security Editor, just bringing you that big breaking news, which is that it's now official, ladies and gentlemen, something that we thought we all knew. Indeed, we did all know it, which is that now the vast majority of people who are from Albania, who are here in this country, are here illegally, not legally. So there we are. We're going to move away from that now. We'll return to it a bit later on, gbviews at gbnews.uk. But King Charles has personally asked Parliament to add Prince Andrew, I think I should say Prince Edward, by the way, Prince Edward and Princess Anne to the list of people who can deputise for him during official duties. Very much not Prince Andrew. In a statement signed by the King, he said the aim of the increase is to ensure continued efficiency of public business when I am unavailable. So councillors of state are authorised to carry out the most official duties of the sovereign, like attending Privy Council meetings, signing documents. There are currently 5 councillors on the list, which include, yes, Prince Harry and Prince Andrew, both who no longer carry out official royal duties. To shed more light on this now, I'm joined by the royal broadcaster, Helena Chard. Helena, thank you very, very much. So this does genuinely now give Prince Harry something to cry about, doesn't it?
I don't think it does. I really don't think it does. I think this is. I think it's a good move. I think it's going to avoid any future embarrassment. I personally think. And let's face it. I mean, for me, I don't find it so constitutionally significant because it doesn't change the line of succession in any way. So I think it's a really good move. I mean, obviously with Prince Andrew and Harry not working, it makes sense. It's practical, I feel, what His Majesty has done. And obviously, they both have deputised previously, so they're not doing anything new. So I think it's for good. Absolutely.
I think so. And I think that King Charles can't go wrong with more Princess Anne. Princess Anne is a very popular royal. She seems pretty sound, as far as I can see as well. No real proper controversy, not recently, anyway. And so, actually, it'd be good to have her in. And it makes absolute sense to try to remove Andrew and Harry from the fray, doesn't it? But I think it will be seen as a snub, though, won't it? Potentially by Prince Andrew, who, if all the noises are true, appears to absolutely not understand the seriousness of public dislike towards him.
You know, he's had, you know, he's been spoken to, His Majesty's spoken to Andrew at length. He understands how things lay, and this is his life for the moment. I mean, the difference is, I mean, if the constitutional law, if he was removed and obviously the line of succession changed, I mean, that would be a big deal. So I feel that this is the best scenario for him at this present moment, absolutely. And also, I think, you know, with Prince Harry, there's slight unease, as we know. There's talk of the Netflix scenario.
Well,
and obviously
it's the book as well, isn't it? It's the book. But, I mean, actually, I think a lot of people right now will think that Harry deserves to be absolutely nowhere near the royal family. Presumably, if it did ever even fall into Harry's lap to deputise for King Charles, he would have to say no because he hates the royals that much, doesn't he?
You know, it's very easy for us all to say that, and everyone's sort of jumping on the bandwagon with everything. I think the ideal situation would be if things could be resolved to a better stage. And who knows, you know, wonders happen. I have faith. But at this moment, I think good on His Majesty for doing what he's done. Absolutely. And as you say, Princess Anne is such a rock. She's a complete credit to the royal family.
She is indeed. All right, thank you very much. That's royal broadcaster Helena Chard shedding some light on the fact that King Charles has, well, essentially biffed Andrew and Harry. You hate to see it. Right, on the show today, we are discussing the possibility of a mass walkout of healthcare staff within the NHS over the Christmas period. It's our big story today. Of course, we did also have that breaking news about something we all knew, which is that there are now more illegal Albanians here than legal ones. But we'll stick with the health stuff for now, because I was asking you what your experiences were. It's looking now like it's gone from a nurses' strike, which would have been bad enough, to a coordinated attempt by paramedics, ambulance technicians, 999 call handlers, hospital porters and hospital cleaners to all, potentially, if it comes off, walk out at the same time, and that time, rather conveniently, being over the Christmas period, when the NHS is traditionally at its most overwhelmed. I've been asking whether or not you've personally had some tough experiences with the NHS yourself, or some good ones, absolutely, and actually, are you now more afraid than ever of getting ill this winter? Jed says, I waited 35 minutes when I was less than a mile away from a hospital. That's presumably for an ambulance. Jed, there we go. I expect there are lots of people, given the fact that we were covering stories last winter of elderly people waiting, in some cases, 24 hours for an ambulance. I don't want to say you got off lightly there, Jed, because I wouldn't say that, especially if you were in pain, but at least it wasn't 24 hours. David says, an ambulance never arrived. This is worse. An ambulance never arrived, despite being told it was 10 minutes away, after my daughter's boyfriend had a heart attack. After 90 minutes of waiting and calling him and drifting in and out of consciousness, my daughter and her sister managed to get him in the car. Now, this is something that I'm hearing a lot more of, and with increasing regularity, David, which is that people deciding just to get to the hospital themselves, actually. Instead of waiting for an ambulance, just get them in the passenger seat and get them to an A&E department. It's pretty shocking, isn't it? Can you imagine, frankly, well, it wouldn't have been any worse if they'd gone on strike now, because the ambulance still would never have arrived, would it? Nicola says, how about some good news? Yes, OK, Nicola, come on. I called an ambulance in July, first time ever. 3 crews were dispatched and the helicopter was on standby. Good grief. An ambulance arrived in 8 minutes, and I've never been so grateful. Local hospital were outstanding too. It's good to have a bit of good news, because it isn't all bad, but unfortunately there does appear to be an increasing amount of poor care, or indeed no care at all, i.e. ambulances not running. Now, I don't know about how you feel about this, ladies and gentlemen, but for me, OK, I went in pretty strong initially about the nurses' strike. I was scathing about it, mainly because of the 17.6% pay rise that they want. I'm not against the nurses' pay rise at all. That's taking the mickey a little bit, to say the least, isn't it? But you can cover a bit for a nurses' strike. Bear in mind that it was 300,000 members of the Royal College of Nursing that were balloted on that, and it's actually emerged that it wasn't necessarily a straightforward majority of them that even voted to go on strike. So those ones who are walking out, you can cover for them. You can take agency staff. It still won't be ideal. There will be disruption, but it won't be catastrophic. But now if you copy it in with paramedic strikes, ambulance technician strikes, hospital porters, cleaners, 999 call handlers, that really is, well, more than the ground level of the NHS, just gone, all in one fell swoop. And that really, surely, is morally unconscionable. Anyway, GBViews at gbnews.uk. But now, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is set to announce the autumn statement on Thursday. Speaking in the House of Commons earlier, Jeremy Hunt confirmed that he is prepared to let local authorities increase council tax, although it feels the same, doesn't it? While Rishi Sunak has declined to apologise for the mistakes that Liz Truss made, which are expected to add billions of pounds in tax hikes. So, as the taxes are expected to rise for ordinary people, like me, like you, I'm asking, should we hike taxes for bigger companies instead? Joining me on the show now is co-founder of Regionally, it's Justin Urquhart-Stewart, and Paul Monaghan, director of the Fair Tax Foundation. Paul, I will start with you. The argument against just taxing your big corporations or your non-doms is that they might just move away, or they might employ fewer people, and actually there's a net loss when it comes to getting all that money in for the Treasury. Your views?
There's no evidence to support that contention. In fact, just the opposite. So if we look at the situation where the UK has had the lowest corporation tax of the G20, the 20 biggest economies in the world, it's been down there with Saudi Arabia and Russia. Yet at the same time, it's had the lowest investment levels and it's had the lowest productivity. So this idea that we cut corporation tax, it leads to more investment, more productivity, more tax, it pays for itself, is a myth. Look at the US, Trump, cut the corporation tax rate, no increase in investment, no increase in jobs, just a surge in share buybacks.
OK, Justin Urquhart-Stewart, you can come back on that. What are your views?
Yeah, certainly in terms of productivity, our productivity has been dreadful, primarily, of course, because of we've been able to have a low-wage economy. Actually, if you see where you actually start getting proper investment into technology, you see that improve significantly. And I think that's a key difference there. In terms of the non-DOMs, what you do find is, well, actually, funny enough, we have some examples of people actually will move away. I don't want to have a low tax, just find themselves attracting people just because it's low tax. What you want people is actually here who are actually contributing to it, bringing money in, bringing investment money in. That's what you want to see. And we've actually, in the past few years, have seen more of that coming into key high-tech areas. If you look over the overall economy, you can't see it, because it's actually hidden by some of the low-tech areas, which really rely primarily on low-cost workers.
Justin, I'll sit with you before I throw it back over to Paul for the final word. Justin, what's the case against a windfall tax?
Oh, in fact, just saying have a windfall tax, you're just putting companies off. But in fact, what is rather strange is actually the Tories have actually come out with a windfall tax, but they're not calling it that. What you've got is this energy investment tax, and that's a windfall tax by another name. So it's going to achieve the same sort of thing. If you've got a reputation for windfall taxes for no apparent reason, you will put people off. However, what is seen as fair is if companies are benefiting off mere good luck of actually holding assets which have gone up in price, then there is a perfectly reasonable reason to do it. What you don't want to do is put companies off doing forward investment. And what you need to do is have the taxation system so that actually they are obliged to do it, not, yeah, we'll think about it in the future.
OK, Paul, I suppose there is that argument that it would put people off.
I don't believe that. I just don't think there's any evidence. I do think there's two things to look at. Those the headline rate of tax, which has gone from 19 to 25%. And you also have to look at the capital allowance regime that operates within that. So what matters is not just the headline rate, because for example, the excess profit tax we've got right now, you only get tax breaks if you invest in fossil
Just quickly, Paul, sorry, just quickly, because I'm getting it, but just quickly, Paul, what evidence is there to suggest that if you tax, the big corporations or your non-DOMs, etc., that it actually generates as much money for the Treasury as it would, well, under the proposed plans that we're hearing from Jeremy Hunt at the minute, which is basically just to tax everyone more?
If we raise tax, we will generate more tax. The Laffer curve position is a myth. And there's a recent paper out from the European Economic Review. It looked at every single study in this area. It was a meta-analysis. There was no evidence.
But do we get more money from? Will we get more money from the Treasury for taxing the big corporations than we would if we do what is proposed by Jeremy Hunt, which is raising taxes for your average Joe? Because if the answer to that is no, and we might put some of those people off, then there's no point in doing it, is there?
We work with listed businesses, social enterprises, co-ops, small, big. There is no big push against corporation tax going from 19 to 25%. There is none. Business wants to pay their share. They want to see thriving public services, an educated workforce, a healthy workforce. The pushback is from a tiny, tiny fringe, the Liz Trusses of this world, and it's absolutely had the rug pulling from it now.
Justin, very quickly, just come back to that. There's got to be a pushback there, surely. I mean, small, medium-sized businesses, one would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, if you're running a small business, and after all, that's where we're so good at. We're really good at setting up small businesses. You need to encourage them to be able to think they're actually going to get some value out of it. Don't overtax them, particularly in the early days. Larger corporations have a different view of life.
Small business, only bigger businesses. I need to say that. Small business are not seeing the corporation tax go up under Jeremy Hunt.
All right, look, both of you, thank you very much. We could have spoken about that for a lot longer, but thank you as co-founder of Regionally, Justin Urquhart-Stewart, and Paul Monaghan, director at Fair Tax Foundation. We're going to have exactly the same discussion, one would imagine, in the coming weeks, because it's not going away anytime soon, is it? So thank you very much. Right, you are with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Lots more to come in the next hour, including more on the news. Get this, it's something that we all knew. I'm quite intrigued to speak to someone like Steve Valdez-Simmons from Amnesty International on this, because I've been telling him this for a while, but no, apparently I was wrong. Well, I wasn't, because more Albanians are here in the UK illegally than those who came here by legal means. Shock horror. There we go. Tell me more about the human rights needed for some of these people. Back in a moment.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
It's 4:01, it's me, Patrick Christys, and this is GB News. A mass NHS walkout is on the cards. Are we getting value for money for our council tax? And the National Crime Agency has revealed that there's more illegal Albanians in the UK than those who are here legally. But first, you see the latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. The latest headlines this hour. The Prime Minister has told GB News dealing with illegal migration is his #1 challenge. Rishi Sunak also said his government wishes to reduce legal net migration, but refused to say by how much. The UK signed a deal worth up to £63 million with France last week in an effort to boost cross-channel cooperation. GB News has learnt more than 2,000 people crossed the English Channel in small boats over the last 3 days, whilst over 42,000 people have made the journey so far this year. Mr Sunak says tackling migrant crossings is a priority.
Government's policy and my policy is that we will want to reduce net migration over time, but I don't want to. Well, I'm not going to put an arbitrary number on it because I want to be honest with people. And I think right now our #1 challenge is getting a grip of the number of illegal migrants coming, and that's the thing I want to focus on first. I think that's what, by the way, the British public rightly want us to focus on. Our deal with the French this week is the first in a series of things that we'll need to do, but people should rest assured that this is a huge priority for me.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has called on Russia to get out of Ukraine and end this barbaric war, blaming the conflict for worsening global economic challenges. Rishi Sunak, who's condemned the Russian president for not attending the G20 summit in Bali, says the weaponization of energy and food security is totally unacceptable. Addressing world leaders, including China's Xi Jinping, Mr Sunak also said the UK is ready to support Taiwan in standing up to any Chinese aggression. He describes China as a threat to UK economic security.
China represents a systemic challenge to our values and interests. It also represents the biggest state-based threat to our economic security. That's why it's right that we take the steps that are necessary to protect ourselves against that. Our approach is aligned with our closest allies, like America, like Canada, like Australia. I'm here at this summit talking to those leaders about our approach to China, and I'm confident that the way we are dealing with it is very much in accordance with how they are too.
Rishi Sunak. Well, Russian missile strikes have been reported across several cities in Ukraine, hours after the country's president addressed world leaders virtually at the G20 summit. According to Kyiv's mayor, at least 2 residential buildings have been hit. Several missiles also shot down by air defence systems. Attacks have also been reported in Lviv and Kharkiv. Here, the Health Secretary has said his door remains open after meeting unions representing NHS staff today. In a tweet, Steve Barclay said they discussed ways to make the NHS a better place to work and that talks will continue. Several unions are balloting their members for industrial action over pay and staff shortages. More than 4 million children are from families that receive universal credit. That's the latest data from the Department for Work and Pensions, showing the number of children in households on credit has risen by 250,000 in the last 6 months to August. It says almost 3/4 of those families are single-parent households. And the research comes as a group of major supermarkets have called on the Education Secretary to expand the free school meal scheme to all children in England whose families receive universal credit. The retailers are warning of rising food costs in the coming months and are calling on Westminster to do more to protect children and help struggling parents. A coroner has ruled the death of a toddler exposed to mould over a long period of time should be a defining moment for the housing sector. 2-year-old Awab Ishaq, who lived in a one-bed housing authority flat in Greater Manchester, died from a respiratory condition caused by mould in December 2020. Rochdale Coroner's Court heard Mr Abdullah had complained to the local council about the mould that was affecting his son, but was told to paint over it. It said the death should raise awareness about the issue. The United Nations says the world population has surged past 8 billion people today. It said China and India account for more than a third of the number of people on the globe, with India set to overtake China as the most populous country on Earth next year. UN projections say that although 8 billion milestone is a sign of human success, it also means there'll be fewer resources to go around. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
Now, this afternoon, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said the pay deal sought by the Nurses Union was unaffordable, but he acknowledged that people were struggling with the rising cost of living. Earlier, when the Health Secretary Steve Barclay met with unions representing NHS staff, he said his door remains open. But there's more to this than meets the eye, because we've been hammering the old nurses' strike action for about a week now, a little bit longer than that. But it comes as paramedics, hospital staff, including ambulance technicians, porters, cleaners, 999 call handlers, are, shock horror, reportedly planning to coordinate strikes with the nurses this winter, which has raised concerns over an already strained health service. So unions representing NHS workers, 6 in total, say they're struggling to retain staff due to a lack of decent pay, and that investing in nursing staff is investing in patients and the health of our country. But remember that I want to hear from you on this. So get your NHS experiences into me. What's the longest you waited for an ambulance? Have you had really good care? We had a few. We had a range of views earlier on, and it's nice to have that. Are you now more fearful than you've been for a long time of getting ill this winter if we have this coordinated strike action? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Joining me now is a chap that we didn't have quite as much time as I would have liked to have talked to him for yesterday, so back again by popular demand. Senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter is Dr Bharat Pankania. Dr Bharat, thank you very much. And in fact, the story has moved on rather nicely, almost like we planned it. Now, when nurses were planning on going in strike, people had a lot of sympathy. People were saying, oh, OK, all right, well, they need a pay rise. 17.6% is a little bit rich, frankly, if you ask me, for want of a better phrase. But now we've got paramedics, potentially, ambulance technicians, cleaners, porters, call handlers. Where do these people get off?
So, Patrick, thank you for having a longer conversation. This is really important conversation to have. And this 17% is 5% above inflation. So putting in context, it's 5% above inflation. The big issue, Patrick, is this. For years, years and years, since George Osborne's imposed austerity measures, the healthcare sector has fallen behind pay. And as a result of falling behind pay, their work conditions have also become much, much more stressful. And of course, there is always that flag, which is you are too important for us to not strike. On the other hand, you're not important enough for us to pay you a fair wage.
Who's
this is the issue.
But what I think a lot of people are really struggling to understand is that across 2022 so far, the NHS has treated 5.3% fewer people than during the same period in 2019. However, the health service's day-to-day budget is up 12% compared with before the pandemic. And people can't marry those two things up. Why is the NHS treating fewer people than pre-pandemic levels with 12% more money?
Yes, so the money is spent on services and things that they are going to do. Unfortunately, unless this is a big tragedy, Patrick, and we must talk about it, which is unless all the jigsaw puzzle pieces are in place, you cannot do that surgery. So we've had a lot of cancellations of that surgery, that oncology, that respiratory assessment, etc., because the other components of that have either been unavailable or cannot meet the demands, etc. What I mean is there has been a lot of sickness and unavailability of everyone at the same time to deliver on that healthcare. So that way you say, well, actually you've done less, but you've had some pay rise, more funding. But this is the way it works. It has to be everyone present at the same time.
I understand that, but the argument about inflation, which is the big one now, appears to fall down when one looks, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, that after adjusting for inflation, this means that the NHS has received 11.7% more funding in real terms. And so the inflation argument isn't an argument, is it?
So, look, whilst that funding goes to the National Health Service, it doesn't necessarily mean it goes into the pay packets of the healthcare workers. So the funding is for... well, it's not exclusively pay, Patrick, you see, and people have not had 11% pay rises. They've had 2% pay rises for a very long time. And in some years, the pay has been frozen. I was in the National Health Service when all our pays were also frozen for many, many years. And so this isn't a problem of today. This is a pressure cooker with problems building up over several years, unfortunately, and it is tragic. It's tragic that it comes to a call for strike action today.
I get that. I'm really keen to know. So when this money is given to the NHS, like this amount of money that was given, it was increased to £151.8 billion in 2022 to 2023, who decides what proportion of that goes on wages?
So it's it's multi-layered. So there is the independent pay review body which recommends pay rises, which successive health secretaries have ignored, considering they always approve their own pay rises. The independent body that was set up, independent body, key word, recommends a pay rise, and it is often watered down. So there is the NHS executive to which Amanda Pritchard heads it, and she reports to the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. Unfortunately, this is a problem that has been going on for a long time. One more thing, Patrick, which I really must also share with our viewers and listeners is this. That private finance initiative that was set up by successive governments, the blue and the red ones, has cost the National Health Service a lot of money. So we have mortgaged a lot of our expenses to private finance initiatives for which we are still paying, and it has made us poorer as a result.
OK, very finally, if we are looking at a winter over the Christmas period, traditionally the busiest period for the NHS, of paramedics on strike at the same time as nurses, at the same time as NHS call handlers, at the same time as hospital cleaners and hospital porters and ambulance technicians as well. That is morally unconscionable, isn't it, for the people, for all of those people, because that is a huge group of people who work in our health service who would be essentially saying people will die now. And I know that people go, oh, well, isn't it a shame that it's had to come to this? Well, it doesn't have to come to this because they don't have to do it.
It shouldn't come to this, and I would say to Steve Barclay, don't use words like, my door is open. kick those other doors open and say, you're not leaving until we have a settlement. We don't want you to strike. That is the way to go forward, and to say, look, it's no good saying my door is open. I'm going to come and kick your door open and make sure we don't have this strike. That's the approach
I get that.
to
I
take.
think some people will be thinking,
Steve
you know,
has
you
only
don't
been
give in, and I'm not.
for a few days.
Yeah, and I'm not by any stretch of the imagination, before someone clips this and uses it against me, I'm not saying that, you know, people who work in the NHS are terrorists or anything like that, but it's that little bit, it's that age-old adage, isn't it? If you don't negotiate with terrorists, if someone's got a gun to your head and they're saying, oh, well, if you don't give into our exact demands, which are extortionate, right, and the 17.6% pay rise for nurses alone, that is extortionate. We haven't got that money. We have not got that money, because then it paves the way for other public sector rises as well of a similar amount. It's absolutely extortionate. It's unaffordable. Well, we can't just give in to all of that, can we? But look, there we go, Dr. Barat, thank you. Go on, quickly. Oh, no, he's gone. There we go, good stuff. Right, Dr. Barat Pankania, there we go, senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School, which is actually quite difficult to say. Anyway, what do you make of all that, people? GBViews at gbnews.uk. The Chancellor has indicated today in the Commons that local authorities will be allowed to increase council tax. We're all skinned. Doesn't matter where you look, we're all skinned. That could be by as much as 5%, and without a local referendum, which was news to me. I didn't realise you could have a local referendum. You had to have one in your area if they wanted to hike it above 3%, 2.9%. So there we go. Scrap the local referendum, hike it to 5%. That seems fair. It's a tax hike being drawn up to fund social care amid soaring inflation and demands for increased wages for public sector workers, like we've just been talking about. So authorities are under pressure to make ends meet, with both Hampshire and Kent County Council, I'm paraphrasing now, but basically saying they're going to go to the wall if they don't get this. Joining me now is someone involved in local government in Kent. It's James Osborne-Jackson. He's the Conservative councillor for Sevenoaks, Lee and Chiddingstone Causeway. Good stuff. That's quite a long business card, but there you are. Now, I had a chap on from a similar area to you earlier who represented Labour. I think he's called Mike Tapp, who said that this is all the Tories' fault. They've been cutting council funding, etc. The Tories have crashed the economy. Is it?
Well, thank you very much for having me on, Patrick. What I will say is the Conservatives are fantastic when it comes to managing budgets, and we have demonstrated that really well here at Sevenoaks by becoming the first council to have a 10-year budget.
OK, all right. I mean, do you think it's reasonable to expect people to pay more council tax? The average council tax now apparently is going to go over £2,000. People are copping it left, right and centre. Are you concerned that people just won't pay because they can't?
Well, that is an option that we have prepared for. Our officers do a fantastic job at ensuring that those who are in financial difficulties are encouraged to apply for the grants available to them. We've seen a number of grants come from central government, and our council by providing discretionary grants as well. Ultimately, here in Kent, we are seeing quite high charges being spent on situations that other councils across the country aren't seeing. And as a result of the COVID pandemic, we are paying for more services.
Oh, yeah, I can buy that completely. And there is a bit of a I talk to a lot of councillors quite a lot of the time. And one thing that I thought that our friend Mike Tapp, who was on earlier on, was saying about the Labour side of things, he said, look, they are the party now of fiscal responsibility. And given that their candidate at the last general election was Jeremy Corbyn, who would have bankrupted the nation if he'd have been allowed to do pretty much half of the things that he wanted to do, one would assume that that's a little bit disingenuous. Are some councils now who say that they are struggling, who say they're about to go to the wall, is that just a result of the fact that they haven't spent their money well enough or planned for a rainy day?
So there are rules when it comes to how much we can have in reserves. We're limited as to the amount we can have in reserves. And when it comes to spending money, if we spend that money unlawfully, the Section 151 officer will intervene and say, you can't spend the money like that, that's unlawful. But when it comes to political control, so you mentioned about Labour there, as we saw, the last time Labour were empowering the government, they left a delightful note on the desk at the Treasury. Since we've been in control here in Sevenoaks, we've built our reserves. They kept on going throughout the pandemic, and they continue to be built, but spent where required.
Yeah, can I just ask you very finally, something, I mean, you're in the Kent area, so you're at the coalface of what's been going on in the Channel, in and around there. There is the additional burden, not just what you had from COVID, but presumably as we're seeing in various different boroughs across the country, the additional cost of not necessarily the hotels, which the Home Office are fronting up largely, but social care costs as a result of that, school places, housing stock, for example. I mean, is this an elephant in the room? Mass population growth, potentially by legal immigration, but also this asylum seeker nonsense as well.
I think you're absolutely right that we are seeing huge costs coming our way, and we've already been seeing that from school places, children moving schools and schools entering deficit, to the fact that Kent is providing statutory duties with the current migrant situation and receiving the most minimal, if any, funding from central government. I think a final point to add to that, if I may, is a lot of people want a lot of things. In order to get that, we do have to pay. And as my chief officers say to me, if you like that, Councillor, we've got to make cuts elsewhere.
Yeah, well, I'm noticing it more than I personally have noticed it in my lifetime ever before, which is this argument, a ridiculous, nonsensical argument, which is basically along the lines of, well, I want this and the state has to pay for it. And that just seems to be coming left, right and centre now, doesn't it? And it's remarkable, I think, when you see that. Is we want everything now. We want a better healthcare service, right? OK, fine, yeah. We want better education. We want more housing. We want to treat all the asylum seekers to five-star hotels. We want this, we want that, we want this, we want that. Well, where's all the money coming from? Energy bills as well, the cost with all that. We need help with all that. We need help with furlough. We need help with all these loans. Well, all right, fine, yeah, but we haven't got all of the money. Anyway, that was Conservative councillor for Sevenoaks Lee and somewhere unpronounceable, James Osborne Jackson, near the Kent area. Right, OK, it was a good job, actually, that he finished off there talking about the additional expenditure and cost that's coming as a result of our migrant crisis. It does appear to be the giant elephant in the room for a lot of people. Well, we are going to raise it, actually, because we're coming up later. The new figures reveal that there are now more Albanians in the UK illegally than legally. That is, frankly, pop goes the balloon for the likes of Amnesty International, everyone who with the big refugees welcome sign. I mean, it is now illegal immigrants welcome in many cases, in most cases, when it comes to people coming from Albania. And everyone goes, well, they're asylum seekers, they're refugees. The National Crime Association says that the vast majority of them are illegal, so have that. Anyway, we've got more of that coming your way very, very shortly. Don't go anywhere.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the NHS and ambulance waiting times. By the way, people are getting very, very irate as well about what's just dropped from the National Crime Agency. GB News was privy to a conversation that they were having, a briefing they were giving, which has now revealed officially that there are more Albanians here in this country illegally than legally. People are getting very, very hot and bothered on social media, it would appear, about this. Where's your source? Where's your source? Stop demonising them. It's the National Crime Agency, so you might have heard of them. I don't know, maybe you want to go and look them up. Anyway, Mark has been on about the NHS crisis. I was 12 hours in A&E, sitting in a room alone. The nurses forgot about me because I had been there so long. Shocking service with a lot of talking and milling around. It's important it's not the same for everyone. Obviously, massive sympathies to you, Mark, and we do hear rather a lot of this. But, yes, we've got somebody else who's been getting in touch. Chris says, I've waited 15 hours in A&E with a spinal fluid leak, grief, which causing a headache that was excruciating. This condition can cause a bleed and fits, and it was nasty waiting to be seen, as I was scared I would deteriorate with the waiting time. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose it's all very well and good highlighting these things. Very sorry to hear that, by the way. What's the solution, then? What is the solution? Because if a lot of the people who are working in the NHS now, if you're just joining us, it's not just nurses who are potentially planning a strike, it's now paramedics, ambulance technicians, 999 call handlers and porters and cleaners who are planning a strike as well. If that is the case, if they just decide, look, we are simply not going to work for this amount of money, then you do have to give them something, don't you? And 17.6% is what nurses want. A lot of people say that's absolutely outrageous. Can I just give you some facts on this? So the average salary for a paramedic, this is in the London area, so knock a few grand off it for outside London. That seems to be the rule with London waiting. The average salary for a paramedic is £36,261 a year. The average salary for an emergency ambulance technician, this is across the UK, so it would include London pricing, across the UK, is reportedly £30,142 for your average nurse, between £32,000 and £35,000. Now, people are saying, well, actually, the NHS is overworked and underfunded. I can buy the overworked side of it because we've got a massive backlog, largely, really, to do with the fact that we decided to lock down so much to protect the NHS. Didn't work out that well, did it? But you might be shocked to know that across 2022 so far, and these are figures that people like the Royal College of Nursing, etc., aren't particularly keen on telling you, the NHS has treated 5.3% fewer people than during the same period in 2019. That equates to 11.78 million people versus 12.4 million people. People go, oh, well, the budget's been cut. The budget's been cut. Well, it hasn't been cut because the health services day-to-day budget is up 12% compared with before the pandemic. And then when people go, yes, well, what about inflation? What about inflation? Well, let me give you this, because according to the IFS, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, it means that there's been an 11.7% higher funding in real terms. So that's after inflation has been factored in. So it is interesting, really, isn't it, to factor all of those different things in. And then on top of that, we add in the moral argument, which is that if there is a coordinated strike to bring our health service to its absolute knees at a time of crisis, it was one thing accepting it when it came to the nurses. It's another thing accepting it for pretty much everyone at your base layer of NHS care, paramedics, ambulance technicians, 999 call handlers. And the reason why I am so up in arms about all of this is not simply just because I think it's morally unconscionable anyway, but it's not people like me who'll be affected by this unless I get very, very unlucky, OK? No, it won't be. It will be the most vulnerable. The people who normally get sick in winter anyway, the people with pre-existing health conditions, the elderly. It will be those who suffer. Frankly, the people who the NHS needs to protect more than anybody else. And I just find that very, very difficult. It was one thing saying an isolated nurses' strike that we can cover. It's another thing, a coordinated attempt to bring the NHS to its knees. That, to me, it's bully boy tactics, isn't it? GBViews at gbnews.uk. But also this afternoon, a fascinating insight dropped into how French Navy ships hand over a boat of migrants to the UK Border Force in the Channel. So we've got access to an audio communication between two boats shadowing migrants who came into difficulty in the Channel. Now, this is standard operating procedure, but it's just fascinating to hear how it unfolds. A lot of people saying it's a taxi service. It sounds a lot like a taxi service. The alternative, of course, is, well, you leave them in the water, which a lot of people, again, think is morally unconscionable. But let's just take a little bit of a look and a listen now to this communication between a French Navy ship and British Border Force in relation to a boatload of migrants in the Channel.
ISSE SMT03. We are on your route
coming with one ship or a small boat of migrants. Are you ready to receive them or not?
Yeah, good morning, sir. Yes, we see you there. We have just been tasked to another event, but there is another vessel on its way with an ETA of about 20 minutes. So if you could please stay with them and tell the other vessel, which is Border Force Ranger, will be there.
Okay, sir, we're received. We are staying with them and we are waiting for Border Force Rangers. Thank you for cooperation.
That's all copy, sir. Many thanks.
Force Ranger, go ahead, sir.
Good morning, sir. This is French Maritime Police. We are right now on your starboard side. We contact Border Force Hurricane just before. Normally it's you who are coming on our position to take in charge the small boat that we are escorting.
French warship, this is Border Force Ranger. Yeah, we're just closing in your position at the moment. We'll be on scene in approximately 5 minutes.
OK, well, there we go. What do you make of all of that, ladies and gentlemen? GBViews and GBnews.uk, because it was interesting. That is important to say that that's standard procedure, really, OK? But it's an insight, isn't it, to the way that there is communication between the French Navy and our border force and exactly how that coordination works. Shortly, I will be speaking to our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, on that. You are with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Also coming up before 5, Rishi Sunak has been meeting world leaders in Bali for the G20 summit. We'll get an update on his visit from our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. But first, it's your latest news headlines.
Patrick, thank you. And the headlines this hour on GB News. The Prime Minister has told GB News he believes the UK's public's #1 priority is dealing with illegal migration, and that it's therefore a key focus now for his government. Rishi Sunak also said he wishes to reduce legal net migration, but refused to say by how much. GB News has learnt more than 21,000 people crossed the English Channel in small boats. Mr Sunak says tackling illegal migrant crossing is a priority.
Government's policy and my policy is that we will want to reduce net migration over time, but I don't want to. Well, I'm not going to put an arbitrary number on it because I want to be honest with people. And I think right now our #1 challenge is getting a grip of the number of illegal migrants coming, and that's the thing I want to focus on first. I think that's what, by the way, the British public rightly want us to focus on. Our deal with the French this week is the first in a series of things that we'll need to do, but people should rest assured that this is a huge priority for me.
Rishi Sunak speaking at the G7 summit there. He's also said that Russia must get out of Ukraine and end the barbaric war, blaming the conflict for worsening the globe's economy. Rishi Sunak, who's condemned the Russian president for not attending G20, says the weaponisation of energy and food is totally unacceptable. Meanwhile, Russian missile strikes have been reported across several cities in Ukraine just hours after the country's president addressed world leaders via video link at the G20. According to Kyiv's mayor, at least 2 residential buildings have been hit. Several missiles were shot down by air defence systems, but attacks are also being reported in Lviv and Kharkiv. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Don't go anywhere. Patrick's here in just a tick.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, more on the migrant crisis. Joining me in the studio is GB News' Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, what is the latest?
Well, National Crime Agency confirming to us that there has been a very significant upturn in the number of Albanians coming to the UK illegitimately, illegally, to work either in the grey economy, which is illegally working in the likes of construction, car washes and the other industries, or indeed actually working for criminal gangs in the UK. It has increased very significantly, they say, and the reason that many are actually coming in to work in the criminal sector, to work for organised criminal gangs, is that they can make more than even working in the grey economy. If you're from northern Albania and the villages of northern Albania, you're earning very, very little. If you come here and work for a construction firm, illegally, of course, but still working not as a criminal in that sense, you can earn between £50 and £100 a day. If you work for an organised criminal gang running a cannabis farm, then we're told that you can earn £10,000 over a 10-week period. What the National Crime Agency are also telling us is that many of those Albanians who are being arrested by police when they raid these cannabis farms, they are effectively cannabis farmers that are looking after, tending to the crops in that house. Most of them are using modern slavery laws. According to the National Crime Agency, they say it is a blatant manipulation of our national referral mechanism. So that is the referral mechanism for those who claim to be a victim of trafficking in modern slavery. Then they are, of course, treated as a victim rather than as a criminal suspect. Well, they are told, according to the National Crime Agency, many of them, by the gangs back in Albania, that this is the tactic, this is what they should use if they are caught in these cannabis farms, to then enter the system, effectively the asylum system, as a victim of trafficking.
So is it, in a sense, telling us, but rubber stamping, what we already knew, which is that there is a significant rise in Albanians coming here illegally?
A very significant rise, and we know that, of course, at the weekend there were hundreds of Albanians who took to the streets of London to say that we're demonising countrymen and women from Albania by suggesting that all Albanians in the UK are criminals. Well, no one is saying that, but we are, according to official sources now on the record, the National Crime Agency, saying that many thousands of Albanians who've come across in the knowledge that they are entering the illegal economy, either to work in the grey economy or to work for criminal gangs, and that the movement of these people is actually being orchestrated and coordinated by these criminal gangs. On the other side of the channel, they are working in cahoots with the Iraqi Kurdish gangmasters in Calais and Dunkirk to get these people across. And again, we understand that those who are picked up in the small boats and taken ashore who are also claiming to be victims of trafficking, that they had been hoodwinked somehow by the criminal gangs. It's the belief of the authorities that the vast majority of these people absolutely knew what they were coming to do.
Well, Rishi Sunak has been saying very adamantly at the G20 that his main priority, along with the economy, of course, is to sort out illegal immigration. He wouldn't be drawn on the numbers of legal immigration. He was quite clear, really, that illegal immigration is his priority. When it comes to getting those numbers down, just struck a 63 million quid deal with the French, more patrols, 40% supposedly more patrols, aiming to get the number of those boats down. You spent all day yesterday outside a migrant hotel, an asylum seeker hotel in Maidenhead, didn't you? One of many now popping up and down the country. And this is something that's not going away anytime soon. We indeed heard reports earlier on, these have been denied by the Home Office, but the wording of that was quite clever in the way that they did it, which is that potentially some foreign trainee nurses who were being put up at a hotel in Yorkshire, potentially booted out to make room for the asylum seekers. What, if anything, can be done when it comes to reducing the amount of hotels being used? Because we just haven't got the room, have we, at the moment?
No, and the more they come, the more pressure there is on the hotel system. And we know, of course, that over a 3-day period, up until yesterday, and including yesterday, 2,225 people came across the English Channel in small boats. A very significant proportion of them will have been from Albania. Now, a lot of those people, once they're processed, will enter the hotel sector. They'll be put up in the likes of the hotel in Maidenhead and, of course, in other hotels right across the country. One thing the government wants to look at is actually housing them in larger centres, in, for instance, former military bases. Butlins, former Butlins accommodation has been spoken about. But that has its difficulties as well, because remember, just a few months back, Priti Patel wanted to house 2,000 young men in a former RAF base in Linton-on-Ouse in Yorkshire. Well, the villagers there, quite understandably, were up in arms because there would have been many more young asylum seekers in their village than actually the population of that village. They fought a campaign that eventually resulted in the government changing its mind. Well, it says it's still wedded to a policy of trying to find these bigger centres, but they're going to come up against local communities not wanting thousands of young men in these accommodation centres.
And people will be amazed as well, won't they, to find out that, look, OK, these places, the hotels, are not a prison, right? And people understand that. But at the same time, I think people don't quite necessarily understand how easy it is for these people to just come and go. And one would imagine that poses a safety risk when it comes to children in those cases, for obvious reasons. Well, anyone, I suppose, really. But also just in terms of people absconding. I mean, if people wanted to walk out of a place and they are desperate to get involved in the black economy, the grey economy, whatever we want to call it, well, realistically, as far as I can see, it seems pretty easy for them to do that. But, Mark, thank you very much. I'll have to leave that there. Mark White, our Home and Security editor. We're moving away from that slightly now because Rishi Sunak has been meeting with world leaders at the G20 summit in Bali today. Speaking to GB News at the conference, the Prime Minister said the UK was taking the challenges presented by China seriously as other Western powers. Well,
China represents a systemic challenge to our values and interests. It also represents the biggest state-based threat to our economic security. That's why it's right that we take the steps that are necessary to protect ourselves against that. Our approach is aligned with our closest allies, like America, like Canada, like Australia. I'm here at this summit talking to those leaders about our approach to China, and I'm confident that the way we are dealing with it is very much in accordance with how they are too. So just to be clear, because there seems to be some confusion about the language, it is both a challenge and a threat. That's what you're saying definitively. I think, look, our language and approach to China, the approach and language that I've set out, is in complete alignment with our closest allies, with the United States, with Australia, what you were saying during the summer, with Canada. So I don't think anyone can look at that and say somehow we're out of sync or we're not taking this challenge seriously enough. Of course we are, and we're addressing it in exactly the same way as countries like America, Canada and Australia are, and that's the right thing for the UK to be doing.
Right, well, there we go, because joining me now is the defence editor at the Evening Standard. There we go, Robert Fox. Thank you very much, Robert. Great to have you back on the show. And, yeah, just talk to us about this, because some people are concerned about potentially Rishi Sunak going a little bit soft on China. Is he not?
Well, you're right, Patrick. The language is certainly softer than Liz Truss's language on this, where she was more or less, challenge. She liked to talk about defeating people and powers, including Russia and China. But I think in that clip, we got to what the current Prime Minister, anyway, really wants to do, which is to be absolutely in line with Australia and the US. They're the closest allies on this. And China is a problem because China is very aggressive and confrontational in certain aspects, but it is indispensable in fora mentioned by Rishi Sunak, like World Health, dealing with COVID. And interestingly, during the G20, Mr. Sunak has mentioned that China may well be part of the solution of getting a peace resolution between Ukraine.
Well,
and
can
Russia.
I just, Robert, can I just interject on that and just hold a bit of a mirror up to some of the views that we get here on GB News quite a lot. A lot of people believe that China was completely and utterly responsible for the coronavirus and indeed potentially the spread of. They also believe that China just does not wish us well generally. OK, so the fact that they're quite a nefarious regime, potentially, about to invade Taiwan, spying on us left, right and centre, quite brutal, used incredibly strong rhetoric when it came to Hong Kong, i.e. they are an enemy. Should they be treated as such?
No, because it's much more subtle than that. That you can hold up the mirror, as you rightly say. And the mirror, unfortunately, is showing a bit of a caricature here. I agree. Look at the behaviour over Hong Kong, and that's one reason why they cannot be trusted. But the fact is that China is absolutely vital to world trade. And let's park coronavirus, because that is part of the great conspiracy theory. We have no idea, really, how coronavirus leapt from the animal world to the human species. And although it happened in Wuhan, it did not happen for the first time in Wuhan. That is absolutely clear from evidence from Italy, from Africa.
I think people are saying they could have done a lot. They could have done a lot more to maybe stop it spreading, or at least a little bit.
I know.
Yeah, look, I think people, frankly, are very miffed about that and still are, because as a result of the coronavirus crisis, yes, there was the death toll. That is significant, people with long COVID, but as well the economic ruin that it's led to. And
created by China.
What's that, sorry?
It wasn't created by China.
Well, yeah, potentially not. Yes, no.
But I agree, people are worried about it, but I don't think they're necessarily in command of the facts about it.
No, well, fair enough. OK, that's all right. I mean, look, there are numerous reports that have not ruled out the lab leak theory. I am not parroting the lab leak theory. I'm simply saying...
I'm not either. I'm not an expert on it.
Absolutely, fair enough. Right, just finally on this China stuff. Now, people are concerned about maybe a return to the Cameron days. I mean, there was even talk of them being involved with something like the development of some nuclear plants and things like that. I can't help but feel as though maybe they're just taking us for a bit of a ride, are they, the Chinese, because they know that they're so powerful and big and strong?
Oh, they're not quite as powerful and big and strong. There's so many things going wrong with their economy and where they've suffered from coronavirus. You are absolutely right, though. We have learnt our lesson. People like Mrs. May were far too accommodating, both on nuclear deal and communication. Remember, Huawei and G5, the next mobile phone system, we had given China a let-in, and if you give China a let-in in telecommunications, they'll get into security.
Well, this is a big thing. This is a big thing. Look, thank you very much. I could talk to you all day about this, Robert, but time is of the essence. Robert Fox there, who's the defence editor of the Evening Standard. Are we softening our response to China? Anyway, right, today marks a very special day for the world, as the population has passed 8 billion, according to the United Nations. It was 11 years ago the world passed the 7 billion milestone. It does remind me a little bit, when you get these promotional offers, when it's like, you are our 1 millionth public toilet user. Do you reckon there's someone outside a maternity ward just waiting? You are our 8 billionth baby. Anyway, it's expected that by 2080, the population would have reached a staggering 10 billion. So I am asking, is it irresponsible to have loads of kids? Let's talk now to demographer Paul Morland and Donica McCarthy, who is a climate columnist at The Independent. Thank you very much. Paul, I will start with you. I'll throw my hands up. I don't want lots of kids, not for any sense of moral purpose to the world, just because I find them really annoying. But is it irresponsible to have loads of kids? We've got enough people, haven't we?
Globally, on average, we're having about 2 children per woman. That's come down from 4 or 5 50 years ago. So, of course, there are people having loads of kids, and some of those are choosing to, and some of those are not yet in a position to choose. Great if those who aren't in a position to choose, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, got more access to contraception. But roughly where we are as a human race right now is on the low side somewhat. There's still a lot of population growth to go through the system, because people are living longer and fewer children, thank goodness, are dying. But with 2 and falling in many parts of the world well below 2, you're going to have a big population decline in many, many countries. And in the UK, we're already feeling labour shortages despite sluggish growth and big immigration.
So we need to get more active in the bedroom in order to plug our economic gaps. I'm going to throw it over to you, Donica McCarthy. Now, I suppose you, as a climate columnist, I mean, you're dead against the idea of massive continued population growth and reproduction, because eventually we'd have to build on the green belt, wouldn't we?
Well, it's nothing to do with the green belt. It's actually got to do with the survival of humanity, if you like. We are looking over the last, since I was born, population's gone from 3 billion to 8 billion, an increase of 5 billion. What has been the price of that? We have lost 50% of our soil. We need soil for food. We've lost 70% of nature in my lifetime. And the International Panel on Climate Change says the 2 biggest drivers of climate destruction are population growth and GDP growth. So unless we act on population and not avoid this 2 billion increase, we are facing an increasingly narrow window to avoid the worst aspects of climate destruction.
I suppose, Paul, I'll throw it back to you. I mean, a massive turn-off, and indeed, therefore, a contraception, could well be the idea, if we get it into people's heads, that if you now do reproduce, you will be destroying the planet and killing everyone on it.
Well, I think the old debate between Malthusians and anti-Malthusians was the Malthusians said, ooh, another mouth to feed, and the anti-Malthusians said another pair of hands to help. And, of course, these days, with education in so many parts of the world where previous generations were illiterate and now they're getting university educations, they will become problem solvers. It's another brain as well. I would agree if we were heading up for endless population growth, I would be concerned. But the fact is that population growth is trailing off, and there are large parts of many, many countries, from Russia to France and parts of East Asia, where population decline is meaning more and more of the countryside is effectively being abandoned and left back to nature.
Donica, would you go for some kind of, by the way, I don't know if this still exists in China, it just, I remember growing up and hearing this policy. As Chinese, you're only allowed 2 kids or something. Would you back a child limit?
No, of course not. That's actually been abandoned in China. China, as it got wealthier and women got educated, women started having less kids. What we need is very simple. It's just that women have the human right to family planning, education and economic independence globally. If we guarantee that to every woman on the planet, the fertility issue will decrease, as Paul rightly said, and we actually won't face the devastation impacts of another 2 billion people to deal with on the planet that's already struggling with environmental and soil and food.
Donica, as it currently stands, no person alive has come up with a really workable, quick fix to solving what you would regard as a climate crisis. I suppose the more people we pump on the planet, the more chance there is of solving that. You should be happy about it. Reproduce.
No, sorry. The best way of tackling climate change, the cheapest way, is every single person that is not added to the 8 billion already. And so what we need to be doing is restoring the cuts that the UK government has done to the United Nations Family Planning Agency, which has resulted in 14.5 million unwanted pregnancies. These are women in countries who are desperately poor, who deserve access to family planning, and we should help them to get that, not be shutting it down as the current government did and as Trump did. It's not right.
OK, well, I suppose I'll let you come back on that, Paul. I mean, OK, I take what Donica was saying there about the family planning side of things. I think there's massive difficulties with that in certain cultures and in certain countries, frankly, where even if you built a family planning clinic, I'm not sure they would be allowed to necessarily go to it a lot of the time in some of those places. But I'm starting to wonder whether or not the climate lot is actually starting to look quite quite negative now, really. We're not allowed to drive anywhere. We're not even allowed to have unprotected sex anymore. I mean, grief, what's the point of living?
Well, I do agree with Donica that it's very important we allow women to make their own choices. And there are countries where the fertility rate is 5 or 6, and it's fantastic that we're helping those countries. We should be helping them, and we should be helping them reduce their fertility rate. What worries me is that more and more countries are falling into the sub-replacement area and ending up with 1 or 1.5 children on average per woman. And that leads to very rapid ageing, huge pressure on public finances, and eventually population decline, which is going to be very problematic.
OK, look, both of you, thank you very much. Good stuff. I enjoyed it. That was demographer Paul Morland and Donica McCarthy, who is a climate columnist at The Independent. Great stuff, chaps. OK, there you go. In case you're just joining us, yes, the world welcomes its 8th billionth person. There we are. Well, fantastic. Anyway, you are, of course, with me, Patrick Christys. We've got loads coming your way, including the possibility of a mass walkout of healthcare workers within the NHS this Christmas. It used to be just nurses. Do you remember those days? Well, now, apparently, it could be paramedics, ambulance technicians, hospital cleaners, 999 call staff as well, and porters. So basically, a really proper coordinated attempt to bring our NHS to its knees at its busiest period. Morally, I don't think that's on, but what is the solution to all of this? I want to hear from you on it. What's your experience of the NHS been like? But most importantly, are you now more afraid than ever before, even during the pandemic, to get ill this winter? GBViews at gbnews.uk. And more on the news that 2,000 Channel migrants took advantage of the weather window to cross the Channel in a small boat over the past 3 days. Oh, grief. And when will the misery end, eh? Because council tax rises are due. That's right. There's going to be less money in your pocket. But a little bit of a light into the mood because you've been sending in your pothole pictures. And it suggests that maybe you aren't getting value for your money. I'm going to crown Britain's pothole king. That's right. But before that, it's your weather. Hopefully it's not raining. Otherwise it'll be a bit freestyle weathering.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. The rain that we've seen across the whole of the UK during the last 24 hours is now clearing northeast. Further showers follow on from the southwest, and it'll be a blustery 24 hours for many, but particularly for the Northern Isles. The isobars tightly packed as low pressure bumps into high over Scandinavia. And so gales or severe gales developing across Shetland and Orkney, and the persistent and heavy band of rain moving in to the Northern Isles as well, heading into Tuesday evening. It clears from the rest of the UK meanwhile, with further showers coming in from the southwest, affecting many places, but particularly the south and the west. Clear spells away from the showers and temperatures dipping away. A colder night compared with recent nights, as low as 2-3 Celsius for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Nevertheless, a bright start for many, certainly a brighter start compared with Tuesday morning. Some sunshine around. There'll be further showers from the word go for the south and the west, and the rain and that strong wind continues for the Northern Isles. Very big waves here as well, gales or severe gales in places. But it's a relatively cool day to come, despite the increase in sunshine, 10 to 14 Celsius fairly widely. And then it all goes downhill once again from the southwest. Heavy rain pushes in during the afternoon and into the evening. That wet weather could cause some issues for Kent and Sussex because of the amount of rain we've seen here recently, along with a strong wind, gales around some southern and southwestern coasts. A lively night to come. The rain pushes north. There will be some gaps in the cloud, but it's not going to be as chilly as the coming night because of the cloud and those outbreaks of rain. Now, the rain is with us first thing Thursday. It's wrapping around parts of northern England into the Midlands, parts of Wales as well. Showers elsewhere. Gradually through Thursday, the rain turns more showery. And on Friday, for most, it's sunny spells and showers, but some longer spells of rain in the north of Scotland.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Welcome back, you wonderful people. It's basically bang on 5 p.m. You're watching Patrick Christys right here on GB News, and I have got a fantastic final hour of this show coming your way, apart from the fact that all of the news is miserable. Could the NHS implode over Christmas? A health workers' union source has claimed that there's been discussion of NHS staff coordinating a mass walkout to cause as much disruption as possible. The Health Secretary met unions representing NHS staff earlier. Let me run you through who some of those staff are. It's not just your nurses, it's paramedics, it's ambulance technicians, it's 999 call handlers, hospital porters and hospital cleaners. Yeah, that's right. A huge chunk of the NHS could walk out en masse at the same time over Christmas to cause maximum damage. Your views on that? This is a time when we could at least use it. We've got massive health backlogs, but it might come as a shock to you to know that despite the fact that we're now out of the pandemic, the NHS is treating 5.3% fewer people than it was before, despite having more money than ever before. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Do you now feel more vulnerable than ever before? Also this hour, audio recordings have been released of French Navy ships and British Border Force boats discussing handing over migrants. It's a taxi service, isn't it? We'll bring that fascinating insight to you as we speak to our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. I want to get the latest on all of that interesting insight. It comes, of course, after we struck that £63 million deal with the French to, let's be honest, do naff all. And Kent and Hampshire County Councils have warned that the government, well, essentially, is going to be bankrupt. The local authorities are going to go pop if they don't get a little bit more money. They're claiming that they're going to have to pass that money on to you. The taxpayer council tax is going up. You're going to be squeezed even tighter. We'll be speaking to the leader of Kent County Council, the man who wrote to the government warning of the state of the authorities' finances. Did you know that the average council tax could now go above £2,000 for the first time? I'm going to run through your bands, Band D to Band H, and what you're going to be paying. But do you actually get value for your money when it comes to your council tax? Do you think your local authority does right by it? As far as I can tell, some of them do and some of them don't. I can't believe the amount of money wasted by some councils on doing things like having a public competition to rename their local gritter. Gritty Gritty Bang Bang has won one up north, believe it or not. Spready Mercury is another fan favourite, but potholes are an absolute nightmare, OK? It's emerged now that 250 drivers get clobbered by potholes every single day. I've been asking you to send in your pothole pictures. You've not disappointed. We're going to crown Britain's pothole king later on. GBViews at gbnews.uk. But right now it's time for your latest headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story on GB News. The Prime Minister has told us dealing with illegal migration is his #1 challenge. Rishi Sunak also said his government wishes to reduce legal net migration, but refused to say by how much. The UK signed a deal worth up to £63 million with France last week in an effort to boost cross-channel cooperation. And GB News has learned more than 2,000 people crossed the English Channel in small boats over the past 3 days. whilst over 42,000 people made the journey this year. Mr Sunak says tackling migrant crossings is now a priority.
Government's policy and my policy is that we will want to reduce net migration over time, but I don't want to. Well, I'm not going to put an arbitrary number on it because I want to be honest with people. And I think right now our number one challenge is getting a grip of the number of illegal migrants coming, and that's the thing I want to focus on first. I think that's what, by the way, the British public rightly want us to focus on. Our deal with the French this week is the first in a series of things that we'll need to do, but people should rest assured that this is a huge priority for me.
Well, the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, acknowledges the government needs to get a grip of the system.
The overcrowding and the conditions that we've seen are just inhumane and they must end. But we also need to be processing these cases more quickly. In terms of what's happening at the moment, only 4% of people who came to Britain last year by small boats have had their applications processed. That is not good enough. The government need to get a grip of this system so that it is working for asylum seekers and is working for people here in Britain too.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has called on Russia to get out of Ukraine and end this barbaric war, blaming the conflict for worsening global economic challenges. Rishi Sunak, who's condemned the Russian president for not attending the G20 summit in Indonesia, says the weaponization of energy and food security is totally unacceptable. Addressing world leaders, including China's Xi Jinping, Mr Sunak also said the UK is ready to support Taiwan in standing up to China. He also described China as a threat to UK economic security.
Now, China represents a systemic challenge to our values and interests. It also represents the biggest state-based threat to our economic security. That's why it's right that we take the steps that are necessary to protect ourselves against that. Our approach is aligned with our closest allies, like America, like Canada, like Australia. I'm here at this summit talking to those leaders about our approach to China, and I'm confident that the way we are dealing with it is very much in accordance with how they are too.
Meanwhile, Russian missile strikes have been reported across several cities in Ukraine hours after the country's president addressed world leaders virtually at the G20 summit. According to Kyiv's mayor, at least 2 residential buildings have been hit. Several missiles were also shot down by air defence systems. Attacks were also being reported in Lviv and Kharkiv. Here, the Health Secretary has said his door remains open after meeting unions representing NHS staff today. In a tweet, Steve Barclay said they discussed ways to make the NHS a better place to work and that talks will continue. Several unions are balloting their members for industrial action over pay and staff shortages. More than 4 million children are from families that receive universal credit. That's the latest data from the Department for Work and Pensions, which shows the number of children in households on credit has risen by 250,000 in the last 6 months to August. It says almost 3/4 of those families are single-parent households. And the research comes as a group of major supermarkets called on the Education Secretary to expand the free school meal scheme to all children in England whose families receive universal credit. The retailers are warning of rising food costs in the coming months and have called on Westminster to do more to protect children and help struggling parents. Downing Street has said the death of a toddler exposed to mould growing in his home is unacceptable and have promised to crack down on unresponsive landlords failing in their responses to tenants. It comes after the coroner examining the death of 2-year-old Awab Ishak said it should be a defining moment for the housing sector. Awab, who lived in a 1-bed council flat in Greater Manchester, died from a respiratory condition directly caused by the mould in December 2020. Rochdale Coroner's Court heard the little boy's father had complained to the local council about the mould, but was told to paint over it. The United Nations says the world's population has surged past 8 billion people today. It said China and India account for more than 1/3 of the number of people on the globe, with India set to overtake China as the most populous country next year. UN projections says that although the 8 billion milestone is a sign of human success, it also means there'll be fewer resources to go around. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens now. Let's get back to Patrick.
Yes, OK. Welcome back, everybody. We're in the business end of this show. We've got loads coming your way, as people can see it there. Council's on the brink, the council tax rise. I'll be talking about that now. But just after that, we're going to be talking about this potential mass-coordinated NHS strike that could see everyone from nurses to paramedics to ambulance technicians to phone operators to porters to cleaners walk out at the same time over Christmas, essentially crippling our NHS. That's nice of them. Do you think that's morally unconscionable or not? And, of course, as well, the very latest from the channel. But we start this hour with those possible council tax rises, which could, let's be honest, this is going to happen, which could see the average household pay £2,000 a year. That's the average household now paying £2,000 a year. Today, the Chancellor has indicated that local authorities will be allowed to increase council tax by as much as 5% without a local referendum. And it comes as both Hampshire and Kent County Council have called for urgent financial help from the government to help them avert a disaster. Now, I'm joined now by Roger Goff, who's Conservative leader of Kent County Council. He's directly called on the government for support as he warns his council could face bankruptcy. It's bleak times, but it's already bleak for just normal, ordinary people. And they might be thinking, well, hang on a minute, maybe you should have prepared a bit more for a rainy day.
Yeah, good afternoon. I don't think it's a case of preparing for a rainy day. We have delivered, for instance, in the case of this council, £800 million in savings over the last decade. So councils have been dealing with a situation of rising costs, particularly in areas such as social care, squeezed resources, and having to deliver savings over a long period. And each year we start somewhat behind because you usually get that increase in demand in those services moving ahead of the resources we have.
Now, is this
on top of
something...
that, we've got inflation.
Yeah, exactly. Now, just quickly, on this one, is this a rather inconvenient truth for some people on the left, which is this, I keep saying it today, but it's true, this elephant in the room, which is mass population growth? And is that really one of the driving factors, as well as inflation? Now, is it just unavoidable? Your services are stretched because we have got massive population growth.
Well, certainly that can put on particular pressures as well, though clearly to some extent for us, if you have more people, you may also have a wider council tax base. I think the challenge is that what we do have also, of course, is an ageing population and also some critical labour shortages in areas like social care, which means that the cost of providing that, even on top of existing inflation pressures, is going up. So we are undoubtedly feeling those pressures.
Now, council tax, I mean, look, a lot of councillors, rightly or wrongly, have been accused of not necessarily really caring about the ordinary people. I once, when I was working at the Westmoreland Gazette up in South Lakeland District Council, caught a district councillor playing solitaire on his mobile phone whilst they hiked up council tax. Some people are saying, is there any way you can cut your cloth elsewhere? Have you got diversity officers that might not necessarily be needed? Have you got, a little bit like South Lakeland District Council used to have, and I'm quoting a job title now, a Director of People and Places? I mean, he was the word things away from being in charge of literally everything, this guy. I mean, is there any way that the council itself can cut back?
Well, again, as I say, we've delivered £800 million in savings over the last decade. So it's not as if we've been shy about doing that. And, for instance, our headcount is significantly lower than it was a decade ago. So, clearly, always you search for inefficiencies. That is part of business as usual. I think the point we have now is that we're not in a situation of business as usual. We have the pressures I've described. And this year also, we've had the impact of inflation, which we believe is an impact of about £45 million on this council's budget.
Council tax goes up every year, doesn't it?
It has done for a number of years. There were freezes in the early years of the previous decade, but they have been increasing. Though quite, certainly at present, the increases we're looking at are well below the levels of inflation.
If people weighed up the improvements to the quality of their services, i.e., bin collections, potholes being filled in, all of your basics, as well as, some would argue that, well, I suppose the more important stuff, I mean, it all makes the world go round, doesn't it? But social care and things like that. Do you think, honestly, hand on heart, there's a direct correlation between the amount of council tax people are paying and an improvement in the quality of the services that you provide?
I think it's hard to make that correlation across because clearly you have different areas with different pressures. So we are providing a great deal more in support in areas like social care, like children's social services. And those are the areas which are under pressure for growth. But the truth is that those pressures have been moving ahead for many, many years. And this is, over a decade or more, ahead of the resources that we have. And then the challenge is to seek, meanwhile, to provide all those services, like roads, the universal services that people see in their day-to-day lives.
Well, and good luck as well with an issue we're going to be talking about later on, which is obviously migrant hotels. I understand the Home Office is forking out for a lot of them, but that trickles its way through to social care, etc., in a big way, and that's not going away anytime soon, is it? Roger Gough, thank you very much, Conservative leader of Kent County Council, who, I'm paraphrasing a bit here now, but has essentially warned that his council is going to go to the wall unless the government steps in. Council tax rises are coming your way, ladies and gentlemen, a winter of discontent. But that's all right, because if you decide that you want to not put your heating on and you'll shiver in your own home and that makes you ill, at least the good old NHS will be there to bail you out. Oh, no, wait, it won't, because we know nurses are set to strike later this month. But this afternoon, reports of a much wider walkout of health workers in general. Let me run you through it. We've got your paramedics. OK, we've got ambulance technicians. We've got 999 call handlers. So you can't even get through to an ambulance now. And then if that ambulance doesn't pick you up, and if, let's just say it did, and then it takes you to hospital, there wouldn't be a nurse there to treat you, so that's good. Oh, and if there's a spillage in the hospital, well, that won't get cleaned up because NHS cleaners are apparently thinking about going on strike. So are NHS porters. So if you're lucky enough to be one of the people who can get an operation, there won't be anybody to wheel you on your bed from whatever empty ward that you appear to be on down to go and get surgery. All of this comes on a backdrop, by the way, of the NHS treating 5.3% fewer people than it did during the same time period during the pandemic. So that's this year. People go, well, hang on a minute, isn't it skim? Well, the health services day-to-day budget is up 12% compared to before the pandemic. And when you factor in inflation, this is according to the IFS, so an official source, it's not Rent-A-Gob over here saying it, that's up 11.7%. So there we go. I was all right with the... Well, I wasn't all right with the nurses' strike, to be fair, but I could just about countenance the nurses' strike because we were told it won't really affect patient care in a massive, massive way. Well, then if you add on the fact that maybe paramedics and et cetera, are all going to go on strike at the same time, well, I would argue that's an attack on our public health. I would argue it's not far off. I won't use the T word. Earlier, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, met with the unions. He said his door remains open. There we go. But, of course, people want a bit more of a proactive approach. What's the solution to this? Do we give them all a whopping great big pay rise? I want to hear from you. Your NHS experience is good or bad. GBviews at gbnews.uk. But, crucially, are you now more terrified than you've been in the past of getting ill this winter? I'm joined now by former Conservative MP and Health Minister Edwina Currie. Edwina, thank you very much. Now... Look, I'll ask it. If nurses, paramedics, 999 call handlers, cleaners, porters, goodness knows who else, ambulance technicians, all walk out in one giant concerted effort to cripple our NHS, it's almost like domestic terrorism.
Did I hear you say, Patrick, that you actually supported the idea of a nurses' strike?
No, I don't. No, you heard me wrong. You heard me wrong. Anyone who watches this show regularly, which I'm sure you do, Edwina, you will know that I am dead against it. No, I said I could just about countenance it in isolation if they covered for themselves. But the whole purpose of that was supposed to be, oh, well, don't worry, people won't be affected. Well, I'm telling you what, if you coordinate it so that I can't call an ambulance, get an ambulance or get treatment when I'm in hospital, then we are knackered. Is it domestic terrorism?
I tell you what it is it's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy by extremely well-paid people who lead these unions, including the Royal College of Nursing, who, in my view, should be ashamed of themselves. NHS Trust in England, the members of RCN in NHS Trust in England have not voted for this strike. Majority of those members and members of the trusts in England have voted not to go on strike, but they're still going to try and call it. It's a blackmail. It's a conspiracy. They're not thinking about their grannies. They're not thinking about their elderly neighbours. And in fact, some of these senior trade union leaders are paid so much they could send them privately anyway. It's a deeply painful, hurtful thing to even suggest. And why are they doing it? They're doing it because they think they can blackmail the government into paying an over-inflation pay rise. The RCN wants 17.5%. Now, let me tell you the other reason why this is a mistake. It's a very, very fundamental one. What happens if the government gives in and pays these pay rises is you then embed inflation in the system. And that means everybody suffers.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody who is paid suffers because their wages won't buy what they wanted. Back nearly 50 years ago, before I became an MP, I was a college lecturer. I used to teach economics and business studies in Kingston-on-Thames. And we had a Labour government that did give in to the unions, not least because the unions were paying for them.
Well, exactly, yeah.
And we got a 24% Horton Pay Award. It was named after the education minister. And 24% pay rise in 1 year, bingo.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next year, inflation touched 28%.
Yeah.
We have been paid, Patrick, in paper money, but that level of inflation stayed in the economy for years and years. It's one of the things.
I just want to stick, Edwina. I get all of that. It's important to have the context, but I want to stick to today's facts as they are. Now, we try and get the Royal College of Nursing on. They agreed to come on and then they cancelled. I can't understand for a moment why. It's fascinating that we can get GPs on to talk about other things, but, you know, they support a nurses' strike, but they wouldn't support all this. They don't want to come on today. Labour are very quiet on this issue. Frankly, it's because they don't like it Upham, because they don't get this kind of questioning on the BBC. If we look at the figures here, across 2022 so far, the NHS has treated 5.3% fewer people than during the same period in 2019. That's despite the fact the health services day-to-day budget is up 12% compared to before the pandemic. And according to the IFS, after adjusting for inflation, this means it's an 11.7% higher funding in real terms. There is no excuse for the NHS being as knackered as it is.
Yeah, well, let me put another figure to you. If you ask people how much we spend on the NHS, they may say 30, 40 billion. That's the amount of money I had to spend when I was a minister back in ancient times. It's actually £157 billion starting next April. And that includes big pay rises for quite a lot of stuff. Most significantly, Patrick, it includes the better pay rises for the lower paid staff. I think that actually matters. The average pay of a qualified nurse in Britain is £37,000. I mean, what you could do, what maybe Steve Barclay is thinking of, is saying, if you promise not to strike, we may give you an extra 1%. That'd be an extra £370 on average for non-striking nurses. But they cannot withdraw their work, their labour, and expect that it will have no impact. It's a cruel and wicked thing even to suggest.
Now, you've said cruel and wicked there, and this is one thing that I can't quite get my head around, which is that I think people have almost been indoctrinated. It's quite Orwellian. It's like, nurses good, Tories bad, right? And at what point do you think the British public will wake up and go, hang on a minute now, it's all very well and good them saying, well, the Tories are not paying us enough money. Well, the same could be said for police officers, for firefighters. People want increased benefits. We're paying all this money under the sun for migrant hotels, left, right and centre. Everything. Council taxes going through the roof. All this, people want a handout, no matter what the issue is. And I can't help but wonder at the moment, people might have to face the reality that a huge amount of NHS workers are willing to let people die this winter, including potentially, anyone's grandmother or the most vulnerable people in society, for the sake of their own pay packet, when, frankly, a lot of them are already paid enough.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if you're arguing with somebody, like when I argue on Twitter with someone and, they're angry, I say, fine, tell us what you paid. Tell us what you paid. Because the fact is that people in the public sector, and particularly in the NHS, and particularly the qualified people in the NHS who are making the running on all of this, like the Royal College of Nursing, the Royal College of Midwives. And midwives have not exactly covered themselves in glory with high-quality care in recent years, have they? But those people are very, very well paid, and they are much better paid on average than the people they are caring for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell you what, Edwina, as well, there will be lawyers now with their ears pricking up, because the medical negligence claims that I think will be lobbied at people when they can't get through to an ambulance, the ambulance takes even longer than it already does, which is usually quite a long time, actually, to arrive, and then they don't get decent care because people have voluntarily downed tools and gone off. I can hear lawyers up and down the country now, just in front of the cash registers going, yeah, we're waiting for it, we're waiting for it, we're waiting for it. Look, Edwina, thank you very much. By the way, on the salary stuff, just FYI, the average paramedic salary inside the London area is $36,200. The average salary for an emergency ambulance technician across the entirety of the UK is $30,142. Those are according to official figures. People can make their own minds up, of course, as to whether or not they deserve a pay rise or whether a pay rise to them is worth elderly people dying this winter. Edwina Curry, thank you very much. That was the former Health Minister and former Conservative MP. Your views on this, no doubt they will be flowing in thick and fast. In fact, they are, because I can see it in the inbox right now. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Keep them coming, people. I'll go to those shortly. But coming up, recordings have been obtained of French and British boats communicating with each other to organise the handover of migrants. People are saying that it is just officially now an absolute taxi service for illegals. Here's a short part of it.
ISSC SMP03. We are on your route, coming with one of the ships or the small boat of migrants. Are you ready to receive them or not?
Yeah, good morning, sir. Yes, we see you there. We have just been tasked to another event, but there is another vessel on its way with an ETA of about 20 minutes, so if you could please stay with them and tell the other vessel, which is Border Force Ranger, will be there.
Yeah, what do you make of that? More on that with our Home and Security Editor before 6 o'clock. Next, I'll be joined by political commentator and former UKIP MEP Belinda de Lucy. She never disappoints. Back in a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel. Welcome back, everybody. Now, Rishi Sunak has refused to put an arbitrary number on the target for reducing net migration to the UK. That's legal, that is. He conceded that the deal with France on the Channel crossings was not a silver bullet. So the Prime Minister was speaking to GB News in Bali, where he's meeting G20 world leaders. His comments come as recordings have been obtained of French and British boats, the French Navy, British Border Force, communicating with each other in English, because presumably it would have sounded like a lower otherwise, to organise the handover of migrants in the Channel. Here is a little snippet of what the French warships and our own border force had to say to each other. It's insightful stuff, let's listen to it.
ISSC SMP03. We are on your route, coming with one of the ships or the small boat of migrants. Are you ready to receive them or not?
Yeah, good morning, sir. Yes, we see you there. We have just been tasked to another event, but there is another vessel on its way with an ETA of about 20 minutes. So if you could please stay with them and tell the other vessel, which is Border Force Ranger, will be there.
Okay, sir, we're received. We are staying with them and we are waiting for Border Force Ranger. Thank you for cooperation.
That's all copy, sir. Many thanks.
Force Ranger, go ahead, sir. Good morning, sir. This is French Maritime Police. We are right now on your starboard side. We contact Border Force Hurricane just before. Normally it's you who are coming on our position to take in charge the small boat that we are escorting.
French warship, this is Border Force Ranger. Yeah, we're just closing in your position at the moment. We'll be on scene in approximately 5 minutes.
Right, now the fact is that both is and isn't a scoop, OK? We don't normally hear the communications between those two parties. And yes, that makes it interesting to hear. But if you really think about it, that's happening all day, every day, isn't it? It is a giant taxi service for illegal immigrants that is taking place in our channel, with arguably greater efficiency than Uber. Joining me now, live, is the political commentator and former Brexit Party MEP, Belinda DeLucy. And Belinda, the sad reality is that when you look at it like that, have the British public just paid 63 million quid of taxpayers' cash to make that interaction more efficient?
I think the money has gone on pure optics. It was almost like, you know, give those Brexity types a bone to gnaw on or a crumb to chew on to distract them from the fact that they're doing absolutely nothing to solve the migrant crisis. So, you know, it's clear our border force don't believe in borders anymore at all. Under Priti Patel as Home Secretary, they even threatened to go on strike when she suggested about pushing the boats back. The former head of the border force, when he left in his departing speech last year, Paul Lincoln said, "Bleep borders, they're just a pain in the bleeping arse." This is how our border force see borders. Comes as no surprise that they're talking like this or colluding with the French. But make no mistake, they're indirectly then colluding with all the human traffickers who must be laughing all the way to the bank because of our complicit behaviour in this.
Well, indeed, and this is a massive issue facing the country because we keep hearing about these migrant hotels left, right and centre and the amount of cost. Council tax is going up, everything seems to be going up. Maybe we could save a bit of money by not giving the French 63 million quid and, dare I say it, not wasting a load of money on housing various different people in hotels across the country. But, I mean, it is becoming increasingly obvious as well, and we can't get around this. People need to stop skirting around this issue, that a huge amount of these people coming over here now have one intention only, which is to work in criminality when they get here. And we are importing criminals in many senses, aren't we?
Well, they have no documents. So, you know, if I was a criminal anywhere around the world, I know that I could get myself to the UK and be hosted by the British taxpayer or, you know, slip into the dark underworld of crime and get away with it. There is no political will to sort this out. The Border Force, our Home Office, our government are weakening our security and putting the public at risk with this inaction and lack of political will to do anything about it. It's almost like public safety is a sacrifice they're willing to make to keep increasing massive immigration year on year. Strong decisions need to be made, tough decisions need to be made. Rishi is completely hiding behind the curtains when it comes.
Yeah. No, indeed. Look, thank you very much. That was Belinda DeLucy there, Brexit Party MEP. I just wonder where you are on this, ladies and gentlemen. GBViews@gbnews.uk. That is, it's important to say, a normal interaction. As our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, will be hot-footing it into the studio shortly, will tell you and will tell us, is that the French there, if they try to get involved with the migrant boats, apparently the migrants just jump into the water, and so because they don't want to go back to France, right? So we end up calling in our boys and girls, as it were, we come and get them. But how do you feel about the fact that not only is that happening, not only is it costing the taxpayer a huge amount of money, not only is it costing us places with social care and housing and all of this stuff when they get here, but we're being laughed at for it? And I think that, for me, is almost like the final indignity of all of this. It's one thing rinsing the taxpayers' coffers dry. It's another thing threatening our national security. It's another thing literally importing people who are desperate to come and work in the drugs trade and organised crime. It's another thing doing all of this stuff. But the fact that we're being laughed at for it as well, I think really takes the biscuit. GBViews at gbnews.uk. You are with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, we have an exclusive interview with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who is in Bali for the G20 summit. He spoke with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, on why tackling illegal immigration is his top priority. We'll also speak to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's been following an official briefing from the National Crime Agency, which claims a significant proportion, shock horror, of the Albanians in the UK will have arrived illegally. But first, it's your latest headlines.
Thank you, Patrick. And the top stories. The Prime Minister has told GB News he believes the UK public's #1 priority is dealing with illegal migration, and it's therefore a key focus for his government. Rishi Sunak also said he wishes to reduce legal net migration, but he refused to say by how much. GB News has been told by the National Crime Agency that many Albanian criminals are blatantly manipulating modern slavery laws by falsely claiming they've been trafficked to the UK against their will. Mr Sunak says tackling illegal migrant crossings is a priority.
Government's policy and my policy is that we will want to reduce net migration over time, but I don't want to. Well, I'm not going to put an arbitrary number on it because I want to be honest with people. And I think right now our #1 challenge is getting a grip of the number of illegal migrants coming, and that's the thing I want to focus on first. I think that's what, by the way, the British public rightly want us to focus on. Our deal with the French this week is the first in a series of things that we'll need to do, but people should rest assured that this is a huge priority for me.
Prime Minister there speaking at the G20 summit in Indonesia, where he also called on Russia to get out of Ukraine and end this barbaric war, blaming the conflict for worsening global economy. Rishi Sunak, who's condemned the Russian president for not attending the G20, says the weaponisation of energy and food security is totally unacceptable. Meanwhile, Russian missile strikes have been reported across several cities in Ukraine just hours after the country's president addressed world leaders via video link at the G20. According to Kyiv's mayor, at least 2 residential buildings have been hit. Several missiles were shot down by air defence systems. Attacks are also being reported in Lviv and Kharkiv. Those are the headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Don't go anywhere. Finance, then Patrick. Stay with us. So a quick snapshot then for you of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1878 and €1.1454. The price of gold, £1,490 and 46 pence an ounce, and the FTSE 100 closing at 7,369 points.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Let's crack right on, because there was a little bit of breaking news earlier on, which is the National Crime Agency have said that a significant proportion of Albanians living in the UK have arrived here illegally. Shock horror. It's after last weekend, hundreds, if not thousands, of Albanian migrants protested in central London, including wrapping the Albanian flag around the statue of Winston Churchill, just in that run-up to Remembrance Day, just as the families as well of some of the people who have fallen servicemen and women were going to pay their respects to their loved ones the day before that big ceremony on Sunday. Yeah, remember that protest? Anyway, they accused the UK government and media of demonising their countrymen and women. Well, as GB News' Home and Security Editor Mark White is about to tell you all, he's right here in the studio with me, actually, a lot of them are just illegal, aren't they?
Yeah, this is a briefing from the National Crime Agency, and I think it's significant because named officers from the National Crime Agency have gone on the record to say it is absolutely their belief that many of the people arriving in the small boats, the Albanians arriving in small boats, are coming with the full knowledge that they are entering the illegal economy, either to work in the grey economy, to work for businesses illegally, or to actually work for criminal gangs. And many of them are deciding to work for criminal gangs because it's very lucrative to do that, Patrick.
Well, it's doubly illegal, some would say, because the entry could be deemed illegal. I think many people would argue that it is. And then if they've got that intention to, once they arrive illegally, to work here illegally in an illegal trade that contributes to goodness knows what, drug crime, knife crime, violent crime, organised crime, fraud, taking money out of the country and lobbing it back over to Albania in the middle of a cost of living crisis. I mean, it beggars belief that anyone still thinks it's controversial to suggest that we are being taken for a ride.
Well, you can understand why Albanians here legitimately working in the UK and contributing to this society are angry that they are being demonised. They say the country is being demonised, fellow countrymen and women are being demonised. But there is no getting away, and now it is an official law enforcement agency coming on the record and saying to us that they believe a very significant proportion of those coming across the English Channel are here with the full knowledge that they're about to enter into criminality. What they say as well is that the Albanian criminal gangs are instilling in these mainly young men who are coming across the Channel that when they are arrested by the police, that they, if they're in a cannabis farm, for instance, making £10,000 a month, £10,000 over a couple of months, farming that particular cannabis operation.
Tax-free.
If they're stopped, indeed, if they're stopped by the police and arrested, they are told to claim that they are victims of modern slavery, that they've been trafficked to the UK against their will and made to work for the criminal gangs. But the National Crime Agency believes that that's just a story, just a way of trying to ensure that those who are caught are not then subsequently prosecuted or deported from the country.
By the way, this is incredibly important news that you would see, ladies and gentlemen. We would hate for any of you to miss it, and that is why we have, just for our Sky satellite viewers, a little note before we carry on with Mark Wyatt, we have begun test transmission of our subtitles, which is probably good for me because I've been told that I speak like a machine gun, so there we go. A test transmission of our subtitles, captions, some would say, and it's on Freeview, sorry, it's on Sky Satellite. It will be on Freeview, Virgin Media and other platforms very, very shortly. So if you're watching us on Sky Satellite, you can now access subtitles for us. Let us know your feedback on gbviews@gbnews.uk. I am tempted now to talk absolute gobbledygook for a second and see what comes up at the bottom of your screen, but I'm more professional than that because it's a hot topic, this. Mark, it's the fact that now they're saying, OK, these people are coming here illegally. Then they've got every intention of working illegally in the illegal trade. But then on top of that, they are so savvy with the law that they are basically blagging it and saying, oh, I'm the victim of modern slavery. I mean, no matter which way you turn, people are laughing at us, aren't they?
Well, one of those senior officers from the National Crime Agency, Steve Brocklesby, who's come on the record to talk about this, described it as a blatant manipulation of our national referral mechanism. The national referral mechanism is the process that's in place to help deal with the legitimate victims of human trafficking and modern slavery. And there are plenty of those about who are manipulated by criminal gangs. But what Steve Brocklesby says is that he believes that many of the Albanians, and this has been reported back to the National Crime Agency by police forces right across the country, are just doing this as a default position. The second they're arrested is that they are claiming that they've been trafficked against their will and made to work for the criminal gangs. But he says, as far as he's concerned, and his colleagues at the crime agency, it is a blatant manipulation.
Just very quickly, Mark, because I'm going to get shouted at in a second, I can't help but fear that there's a massive story looming around the corner, which is the amount of people absconding from migrant hotels, going missing, that including children, very, very devastatingly as well. You spend a lot of time in and around the migrant hotel scene, as it were. Do you think it's easy for these people to abscond? Because it doesn't really matter now if you just rock up on a boat and manage to leg it across a beach somewhere. You can actually get sent to a migrant hotel and still get out of that, can't you?
It's as easy as opening the room door in your hotel and then leaving through reception. There's no one there to stop you because you're in the asylum system. You're not a criminal in the eyes of the law at that stage, so you're not dealt with as a criminal. You're dealt with really as a potential victim and an asylum seeker, a refugee, potentially further down the road. So, of course, they would not lock you up. They will only lock you up in a detention centre if you get to the point where your asylum claim is being turned down, where they're about to deport you from the country and they think you might abscond. So many people, what's happening, they're going into these hotels, hundreds of them. Again, we're told this by Border Force officials on the record, hundreds of them just disappearing within days of the hotels. These are Albanian, mainly young Albanian men who are then going off to work in the illegal economy or for criminal gangs.
Mark White, thank you very much. Mark White, there, our Home and Security Editor. Great stuff, Mark. Thank you very much for bringing us that. Isn't it amazing that we keep being told we're a horrible little racist country and that our own actual National Crime Agency can say we've got loads and loads and loads of these people coming here illegally with every intention of working here illegally in grey economies when they get here. And then, of course, they're absconding even if they do manage to make it to the migrant hotels and they expect the British taxpayer to pay for it all. But yes, of course, we are some kind of horrible and welcoming nation. I mean, come off it. Anyway, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on... It's a shift in tone now, people. Potholes. That's right. I've been asking for your pictures throughout the show because council tax is going up and I thought, hang on a minute, do you think you're getting a bit of bang for your buck when it comes to all of this? It's just a matter of time before people finally snap. This is according to David. The local councils are only wanting more because they are short of money, not because they're actually doing important work. Do people that work for a living get more when they demand it? Well, potentially, in the sake of nurses, which is something else that we've been talking about. Woody has said... up in Aberdeenshire, we have had to live with terrible roads for years. Year by year, Aberdeenshire increased our council tax fees and doesn't seem to invest in the area. How do you feel, ladies and gentlemen, about your council tax rising, OK? I want to know from you. Have you seen... Because it goes up pretty much every single year. Have you actually seen any increase in the actual services available to you? Have you had some issues? I asked people earlier on what their views on their local council were, and some chap got onto me on Twitter and he says his local council has decided to turn the lights off at night, the street lights off at night to save money, which renders them entirely pointless, doesn't it? So there you go. June says, I think the public should know that quite a large portion of their council tax goes towards police pensions, council employee pensions, salary increases for council executives, plus their pensions, plus funding money for new police cars, very expensive. Do we get the service? And we've had Brent on. He says Barrow-in-Furness truly is just one big pothole. Now, as somebody who used to cover the Barrow-in-Furness patch at a local newspaper, I couldn't possibly comment. There we go. Right, the Chancellor has indicated in the Commons today that local authorities will be allowed to increase this council tax by as much as 5% without any kind of local referendum. It's plans to be drawn up. Essentially, look, I'll paraphrase and go to the guest sharpish, because councils are saying they'll be skint if they can't do it, but you, the public, a lot of you are saying, you know what? I'm not going to pay. I can't pay. I'm joined now by Investigations Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, Elliot Keck. What the Keck is going on?
Well, it's extraordinary and very, very concerning times for taxpayers. The discussion is that the rate at which councils can increase council tax will increase to 5%. Currently, there is a cap at 3%, which means that if any council is brave enough to say to their residents, we don't waste your money, it's just that we actually are really, really scared. Yeah, exactly. They have that option. And the problem is that by increasing it to 5%, you're giving councils an easy way out.
But look, I've had a councillor on from the Labour Party, I've had a councillor on from the Tory Party. You, as an objective forensic analyst of the way that taxpayers' money is spent, are people getting value for money from their local councils at the minute?
I don't think they are. I mean, it will vary council by council. I mean, take Hampshire County Council. If there's one thing you can say for them, despite the financial difficulties they're going through, they have kept council tax bills low. They have the lowest Band D rate for any county council. But there are plenty of other councils. I mean, Nottingham is a particularly
name and shame. Get it out there. Come on.
You know, I mean, it is really, really an appalling record, and they've hiked taxes up year after year after year. Well, they've cut bin services and cut other services. So, you know, and the reason
why... Where's that money going then? Where's the money going?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, part of it is going to the now 3,000 people, almost 3,000 people that earn over £100,000 or remunerated over £100,000 within councils. Some of it's going, you know, to fund fancy flights overseas. Some of it's going to fund expensive refurbishments, expensive offices, that sort of thing. So, I mean, listen, it varies council by council. There are good ones and there are bad ones. But, I mean, clearly to hit council taxpayers at a time when inflation and taxes are already going up would be a disaster.
So would members of the public, people watching this show, listening to us on radio, watching us online, etc., including now for our Sky Satellite viewers with subtitles and captions, let us know how that service goes, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But would they be right to think, actually, I don't want to pay this council tax rise. I'm skint enough already. I've got energy cost increases. Every time I go to the shop, I need to remortgage my house to buy butter. And now all of a sudden, I've got this council tax rise for a service that doesn't seem to suit me. Do you think we're going to end up with mass non-payments?
Well, I certainly wouldn't encourage anyone to break the law, but the reality is council tax has gone up by about 250% since 1993, 1994. Now, over 50% of councils charge over £2,000 for a Band D property, which is about the average property. And I think, you know, these figures show the extraordinary rise in council tax over the decades, and yet, you know, we're not seeing the services that we expect.
And are you seeing some councils, just quickly, some councils, are there any councils of any particular party or demographic who seem a bit more willy-nilly when it comes to spending and not saving?
Well, I mean, Nottingham are particularly bad, Croydon are particularly bad. I mean, Croydon, you know, they paid out their chief executive about £650,000 after it was bankruptcy.
Wild.
Yeah, that was just an exit package. So they're particularly bad. Slough have had problems, councils up in Northumberland. So, I mean, listen, there's a countless...
You could rattle them off.
Yeah, yeah.
Good grief. And it's important to say that none of these councils are here to defend themselves, probably because they're drawing up more ways to rip you off. No, of course, you can't possibly say that. Thank you very much. There we go. Elliot Keck there, who is the Investigations Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. How do you rate your local council? Well, another reason why I wanted to talk about this is because it's the bane of motorists and I presume cyclists' existence. I just care less about them. Potholes. Because Britain is almost like a pothole capital of the world. 225 breakdowns a day this month alone were due to a heavy downpour of rain, worsening conditions in potholes. It's kicked off. AA figures show that pothole-related breakdowns have absolutely soared. Now, there has also been concerns raised about how the £500 million annual fund capable of fixing around 10 million potholes could be targeted as part of spending cuts that are due to be announced in this autumn budget on Thursday. Essentially, what we've done this hour is massive strikes. How do you feel about that? The migrant crisis. How do you feel about that? Massive tax hikes when it comes to local councils. And here's an area where we think we can go out and we can see the bang for our buck, can't we? We can see whether or not they are spending the money wisely, and when it comes to things like potholes. To shed some more light on this, I'm delighted to say I am joined by Mr. Pothole campaigner. Great stuff. There we go. I mean, Britain is in the midst of a pothole crisis, is it not?
Yeah, and it has been for several years. I mean, decades of underinvestment by central government. Yes, some money from local council tax goes into it, but central government have not waken up to the fact that there is a massive road maintenance backlog. To put it in context, last year, the carriageways, which is a bit between curbs, the backlog is at £12 billion. We've now got increased costs and the network failing even more, so that's probably nearer £15 billion. And that doesn't include bridge maintenance, footways, drainage and everything else. The whole of our highways infrastructure is neglected by successive governments. Labour could have done something back in the year 2000 when the backlog was £3.75 billion and we had more money. So, you know, and many councils, and I'm not here to defend councils because, yes, they can do things better, there's better techniques, but the pressures on them for all the other costs in terms of social care and children's services means that some councils rely on that money from central government. Government's cut £400 million last year, this year and next year in the general maintenance budget.
OK, well, there we go. Well, look, thank you very much, Mr Pothole. It's been great to have you on. Pothole campaigner who's been, well, I suppose, desperately trying to do his bit for humanity. We were showing you some pothole pictures there, weren't we, for at least a little while? I mean, you could fit a blue whale into one of those, couldn't you? I mean, it is shocking, shocking stuff. But normally at this point in the show, I hand over, don't I, to the wonderful Michelle Dewberry for Jubes & Co. But tonight it is the intellectual titan that is Emily Carver sitting in for her. Emily, what do you got coming up on your show?
Thank you very much, Patrick. So, taxes are going up on working people, it looks likely, with the autumn budget next on Thursday. Meanwhile, over 5 million people are on out-of-work benefits. Is it fair for the Chancellor and Rishi Sunak to clobber working people even more? We're also going to be looking at China in terms of Rishi Sunak. He's at the summit in Bali, the G20 summit. He's been accused of changing his tune on China. He's getting a bit soft. Should we be tougher on China? And also, it looks like Christmas biscuits are at risk. The Christmas factory workers at the biscuit factory are going on strike too, so we're going to be getting into that.
Well, I mean, yeah, look, hey, we've spoken a lot about some things that maybe members of the public would regard as vital to their existence. The NHS, tax hikes for everybody, you know, all of this stuff. But realistically, the big thing for me is going to be whether or not I can have a biscuit this Christmas. And if they're going on strike as well, I mean, the world's gone mad. I'm sick of it. Anyway, Emily, everyone will be tuning in, no doubt, for you very, very shortly. Emily Carver will be filling in for Jubes with Jubes & Co. That is, of course, from 6 until 7. Don't miss it. After that, as well, you'll be lucky, people. You're going to be treated to a little bit of Nigel Farage because he's going to be teeing off, I would imagine, on the very latest that we've had through the breaking news, the big breaking news that we had live on this show. The National Crime Agency has now admitted, finally, what we've all been thinking and knowing for a rather long time, that with increasing regularity, the people coming over here across the channel from Albania are, in fact, not only illegal, they've got every intention of working here illegally when they get here, and they are, believe it or not, laughing at us completely by quoting the modern slavery law in order to get themselves out of deportation. We're being laughed at left, right and centre. Thank you very much, everybody who's been getting in touch. I've been Patrick Christys. I'll be back again at 3 p.m, 3 till 6. I'll hand you over now to the wonderful Emily Carver.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. The rain that we've seen across the whole of the UK during the last 24 hours is now clearing northeast. Further showers follow on from the southwest, and it will be a blustery 24 hours for many, but particularly for the Northern Isles. The isobars tightly packed as low pressure bumps into high over Scandinavia, and so gales or severe gales developing across Shetland and Orkney, and the persistent and heavy band of rain moving in to the Northern Isles as well, heading into Tuesday evening. It clears from the rest of the UK meanwhile, with further showers coming in from the southwest, affecting many places, but particularly the south and the west. Clear spells away from the showers and temperatures dipping away. A colder night compared with recent nights, as low as 2-3 Celsius for parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Nevertheless, a bright start for many, certainly a brighter start compared with Tuesday morning.